All right, welcome to the third episode of Cinema Pod. As always, I am the host of this podcast, Benjamin Weingard, assistant professor at Hillsdale College. And as always, co-host is the currently unemployed Bo Weingard.
Yes, the humble co-pilot, happy just to correct the ship if something goes wrong.
Still undisclosed location.
Yeah, still undisclosed location somewhere in the Midwest.
Somewhere in the rumor had it that it was Ohio, but some people are unsure. So we'll just say Midwest. That's as close as we can get.
Yep.
On today's episode, we'll be discussing the blockbuster 1988 action hit Die Hard, starring Bruce Willis
and Alan Rickman and Bedalia.
I don't know who that is.
Isn't it Bonnie Bedalia who plays Holly Gennaro?
Holly Gennaro McClane.
Yes. So I have a brief summary, very brief summary, and then we can get into it. So Bruce Willis plays John McClane, who is a New York cop visiting his estranged wife at a Christmas party in Los Angeles, which turns out to be bad timing. The building is taken over by Hans Gruber, a sleek and sophisticated thief, and his motley crew of associates who hope to steal its rather implausible $640 million in bearer bonds. Or is it 64 million? 640.
640 million.
Yeah, $640 million. Unlike the stereotypical action hero of the 80s, McClane desperately hopes that the police will arrive and only reluctantly works to thwart Gruber's plans. Easily one of the better action flicks ever produced, in my view. Die Hard is deftly directed and intellectually rewarding. It satirizes authority, criticizes masculinity, and deconstructs both the action and Western genres, becoming a kind of meta commentary on American consumer culture and capitalism. Also noteworthy that so I think we're going to a sort of theme running through this is how aware of the satire was McTiernan,
yes,
and how aware were critics. Because so one thing to know, I think I'd like to start with, we think of Die Hard and we think of big dumb movie with explosions, but I'm going to at least make the case that it's a very intelligent, cerebral action film. But that was lost on reviewers, reviewers at least, including very intelligent reviewers such as Roger Ebert.
Yes, and I will get to a few of the quotes from reviewers, including Ebert, momentarily. First, we'll note, so it's directed by John McTiernan, who also directed such films as Nomads was his feature debut. I have not watched it.
I have not seen that either.
Did not get good reviews. He also directed commercials. And then from Nomads, he directs the classic 1987 film Predator, which is an interesting film. Some people see it as a kind of a commentary on Vietnam. So
yes,
it is interesting. It's also an obvious send up of the testosterone drenched 80s action genre as well.
It's also an analysis of masculinity, which supports my view that Die Hard is aware that McTiernan is aware of what he's doing, that Die Hard is created from a sort of meta perspective.
Yes.
And that the criticism of masculinity and excessive machismo is something that runs through his oeuvre.
Yeah, and so he directs then Die Hard, obviously 1988, then The Hunt for Red October, Medicine Man, the ill-fated Last Action Hero, which is a clear parody of action films, but very clumsily done and over the top. he's known for his.
And he does rollerball, by the way.
Oh yes, yes, and
he ends his career thus far with 2002's disastrous rollerball.
Yeah, so notable that he hasn't directed a film since I think 2003, and he spent some time in prison, I believe in 2014.
Yes, for lying to the FBI multiple times, because apparently he hired a private investigator to record on and spy, like one of the record perhaps the conversations and spy on one of the producers for Rollerball, because he didn't know if the studio was behind like the vision he had, and there was like a lot of conflict there. So it's possible that Rollerball, that the reason that film was so atrocious, and I watched a little bit of it last night, I could not get through I couldn't get through it because it was indeed absolutely atrocious. But perhaps some of that is because of all of this simmering tension, and who knows what the studio did with it, etc. So I'm not going to blame McTiernan for that failure.
His directorial style is known for unfussy following shots, and tightly woven classicism, although innovative in his use of film language, and he self-confessedly is not a fan of the master shot, medium, and close-up kind of language. So
that to be clear, the master, medium, close-up language, if you don't know what we're talking about, usually if you enter a scene, you have a master shot. That's a shot that is basically like a long shot that establishes the geometrical relations among the objects and the people in the room. Then you go medium, which is basically from the waist up, which gives you more of a sense of the people and a little bit of their relations, but you don't get the whole thing. Then you do the close up where you show their emotions and how they're reacting to each other. McTiernan, he said he didn't like that style. He could never stick to it, etc. And in Die Hard, indeed, at times he doesn't.
And you actually see this in the opening sequence. So the first shot is of a 747. The very next shot is an extreme, or not extreme, but a close-up of a salesman talking to John McClane.
And sometimes what happens when you do the McTiernan styles, you almost work out.
Right.
So you try to fit. So like as the viewer, you don't know what you're looking at. You see like a person talking or something, and then you learn what you're looking at as the scene progresses.
Yes. And another shot that's not, or it's a cut, but it's not used really in film anymore, but McTiernan was particularly fond of it, is the so-called axial cut. This is a type of jump cut. So you're looking at a particular character, and all of a sudden the camera starts zooming in or moving closer to an object as if it's on like a direct rope kind of from the character to that object. This is, he does it in Hunt for Red October as well, but in Die Hard, the scene, it's toward the end where McClane sees the duct tape that will allow him to, but we'll get into it, but you see McClane looks at the duct tape, and then the camera zooms really close on it, so you as the viewer are aware of the particular object that the character observed.
So it's basically like it's a kind of insert shot in some sense with zoom. And also, just kind of to set the scene here before we get into the reviews of Die Hard and then into the film itself. So anyway, so let's be clear. So this is McTiernan. He's the director. The writers are Stewart and D'Souza, and we won't get too much into that, but a lot of the conflict here, just to be clear, is probably, a lot of the conversation is, how much of a genius is McTiernan and how much of his success in some sense is serendipitous, because and on the side of serendipity is he makes 3 great films, I think, undisputed, maybe not masterpieces, but Predator, a great film, a great action film. Die Hard, probably an undisputed masterpiece, and Hunt for Red October, a great film, and then nothing.
Yes.
So Die Hard is the sort of apogee of his artistic achievement. He makes Hunt for Red October. I don't think anyone would complain with that film. It's a very stylish and effective thriller. And then he makes crap. Medicine Man is mediocre at best. Rollerball's terrible. And so you can see people might make the argument, well, somehow his sensibility, it just got lucky with the material. And
or perhaps he wasn't as self-aware.
Right. Oh yeah, and Last Action Hero. I'm sorry, that's another one. And what I think the case that he wasn't self-aware would point to Last Action Hero, because Last Action Hero is like this over-the-top, almost SNL like parody of action films.
It's just not clever at all.
Right. It's just so over the top and in your face that you would say maybe McTiernan just didn't get how to do the subtle satire, and he wasn't actually consciously doing that in Predator and Die Hard.
Right. So maybe he was actually quite serious in Predator rather than tongue-in-cheek with his play of the action film and playing around with these tropes and masculinity and so on. So it's an outstanding question. Just to kind of set the stage for the action film, I won't go over the entire history, obviously, but important to note that the action film emerges from, historically it begins with Westerns and swashbucklers. Actually, Alfred Hitchcock's 1959 North by Northwest is an important development, particularly because North by Northwest features your first major set piece, like action film, right? So there are 2 major set pieces in North by Northwest, namely the crop duster scene and the ending on Mount Rushmore. And the set piece then becomes a staple of the action film. All of the set pieces in Die Hard take place in the Nakatomi building. We'll get into that. But without the set piece, you don't really, or without multiple set pieces, you don't really have an action film by the expectations of the modern viewer. In the 70s, you get martial arts films, more gritty realism. And then in the 80s, I think it's fair to say you retreat back into kind of more of the fantastical. You get Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981. And then importantly, because Die Hard also doubles as a buddy cop movie, you get 1982's 48 Hours with Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy, which is widely recognized as the first buddy cop film. So we take the buddy cop film completely for granted. And if you watch 48 Hours now, it's just kind of a mediocre film. But at the time, it was doing something interesting and original. Obviously, like the buddy film, like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was, that trope was there, but putting that into the cop film was new and unique. And then in 87, you get Lethal Weapon. 1984, you get Terminator. Importantly, as you go through the early 80s, you get this crop of hyper macho action stars. Now, there's debate about why did you get this hyper testosterone, like muscular leading male figure in the 80s. One hypothesis is the widespread availability of effective steroids.
Are you suggesting that Stallone was using roids?
No, I am not. Nevertheless, you get such household names as Sylvester Stallone, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren, and Chuck Norris.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And
obviously.
yes,
another thing that you get with the 80s is, so in the 70s, the action films, Dirty Harry, Bullet, I guess Bullet's in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
but you get Bullet, Dirty Harry, French Connection, etc. These are like kind of gritty, at least quasi-realist action films. These slowly you get this transformation to these hyper masculine action films that are ridiculous
Yes.
and that are full of corny one-liners, right?
Yeah, the one-liner becomes a staple of the 80s
Right.
action
So
film.
you would get the scene in which like Arnold would impale somebody to a wall and say "stick around" or something. That became a very common thing in the action film.
Right.
You see this in like Commando, for example, which is a Schwarzenegger film, or True Lies, which also is kind of a parody coming a little bit later.
Yeah.
But this was, yeah. So the action film, by the time you get to Die Hard, you had this transformation in the 80s to this, you know, it's not really gritty. It's not realistic. It's sort of like we expect that Schwarzenegger is going to come in. He's going to kill 22 people, make a bunch of cracks while he's doing it. And we're not really going to worry about his dying because we know he's not going to die. He's almost invulnerable.
And however causal the relation between these action films and the Reagan era is, it's clearly the case that they fit the cultural milieu of Reagan America in the 1980s, this kind of resurgence of patriotism, kick-ass attitude, trying to rid the ever-present Vietnam syndrome, right?
Yeah, and you even get the line, I think it's in the second Rambo, where he says, "Do we get to win this time?" So in the and it's interesting that just because obviously, I mean, because in fact, Die Hard is, as I say, it's a meta commentary on these films, and it references them quite explicitly. So it's not off topic to discuss this. That Rambo begins with First Blood, which is actually this relatively slower, more meditative and somber film about a Vietnam vet who's completely alienated, who comes to this town and they treat him very poorly, etc. It morphs from that to Stallone just gets ripped out of it, just fucking jacked, right? And then is goes into the jungle and fucking kills everybody in the second and the third ones. I mean, it just gets completely ridiculous. More what we think of when we think of Rambo. And of course, this is what Weird Al was parodying this in that film that he made, VHF or whatever. And then you see this gets mocked in Phil Collins' Lands of Confusion with the puppets. So yeah, this was a sort of, when you think of Reagan's America, whatever, as you say, whatever the causal sequence here, certainly Rambo and Schwarzenegger come to mind. This kick-ass patriotic hero who has no qualms about destroying other people and cracking jokes about it.
Yeah, so a form of muscular jingoism, let's say.
Yeah, yes, yeah, you might call it that.
So Die Hard is such a effective film and such a box office blockbuster that the immediately preceding the film, you get this just rash of copycat films, right?
Well, don't you think we should say, like, okay, so what is Die Hard doing differently?
Yeah, so do you want to?
Right, because yes, you do get this rash of Die Hard on a blank is what they call them.
Right.
But before that, so in the context of, okay, so we've got these action films. These are the 80s action films that the audience, this is what the audience expected. You're going to watch this. And interestingly, so Die Hard was originally, it was taken from a novel. And I think it was Stewart who wrote the first version of the script, Jeb Stewart, and then Stephen D'Souza was changing it on the fly, even on the set. but the producer had tried to get many people to play McClane. And
Mhm.
this is interesting because this is where there is serendipity, right? Because they tried to get Sinatra, which is a lot, we don't need to go into why, but then they tried to get these traditional action stars, Stallone, Schwarzenegger, etc. And eventually they go to Bruce Willis, who at this time was primarily known for a television show, Moonlighting, which was more of a comedic show.
Mhm.
And Willis had flexed his comedic chops. So he has clear comedic chops, but it's not clear that he was a dramatic actor, and they were worried about it. Although apparently they asked analysts, the producers, like, would it hurt the movie? And they said no, it wouldn't. And so that's when they pulled the trigger.
Yeah, Willis also got a
He
healthy
got
salary, 5
He got
million,
5 million.
which at the time,
Right. So this is important because Willis is the perfect actor for McClane for a myriad reasons. But one important reason is because he's this kind of balding dad type. He doesn't look like the traditional action hero. If he's taking steroids, he's doing a good job of hiding it because
yes,
although he's in shape, he's not jacked up. He's
right.
kind of average everyman. And this is what is different about Die Hard, among other things, of course, the quality of directing and the script, the dialogue. But the one of the important things about it is that the main character, the action hero of the film, is kind of an everyman who just happened to get stuck in a shitty situation. And in fact, he spends, as we'll discuss, I guess, he spends the first 30 to 50 minutes hoping the police will come and solve the problem.
Mhm.
He's not enthusiastic about taking care of it. In fact, he's very afraid of it. And in the first scene, he's actually afraid of flying, and he says he
Right.
hates flying, which already sets up that this isn't Schwarzenegger, right?
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger would not be afraid of flying. He would fly the thing by himself, with one wing or whatever.
Right.
So that's what's important about this context, is that Die Hard's going to be this different kind of action film with a vulnerable action hero, and it's going to make commentary about all of these other action films.
Right. That and so the copycat films, they copied the
What's like a good example of a copycat film?
Well, the best examples, I think, Passenger 57 in 1992, Under Siege in 1992,
Yes.
Air Force One in 1997, Cliffhanger in 1993. Speed is another kind of copycat.
Speed's directed by Jan de Bont, who was actually the cinematographer on Die Hard. And Speed, out of all of these Die Hards on a blank. So Under Siege is Die Hard on a boat. Yep. Passenger 57 is Die Hard on a plane. So is Air Force One. And then Speed's Die Hard on a bus.
Cliffhanger is Die Hard on a mountain.
Right, Die Hard on a mountain. There was that Van Damme one that was like Die Hard in an NHL rink.
Right. So they copied the formula of throwing an individual into extreme unexpected circumstances.
Right.
But most of them failed to actually absorb the main lesson of Die Hard, namely have your protagonist possess very real vulnerabilities. Right. And it's, I mean, take Under Siege. I mean, Steven Seagal is a terrible actor and unable to portray underlying vulnerability.
Also very unwilling to do so.
Correct, right?
Just
that's right. So most of we see this, it's interesting how similar it is with Halloween, in the sense that of all of the films that copied the Die Hard formula, there were maybe 2 or 3 that were successful, and none of them nearly as good as the original film.
Right, because in some ways what they took from Die Hard, just as the subsequent slasher films, in my view, took the wrong lessons from Halloween, so too the action films took the wrong lesson from Die Hard. They just used the sort of script gimmick of having this person stuck in this situation. and ignored the vulnerability of the character, and that adds to the tension and the drama. And also, of course, the quality went down significantly, and you didn't have a McTiernan directing it.
Right. So now I'll just, before we get into the actual film itself, just to kind of even further set the stage for this debate about how aware McTiernan was of what was going on. Here a couple of contemporary reviews, one from Ebert and the other from Karen James, who was at the New York Times, kind of capture this. So Ebert gave the film 2 out of 4 stars. He noted that it had a lot going for it and it was well directed, but he was specifically irritated by this character, the deputy chief of police, Dwayne Robinson, and we'll get into him in more detail. But
Yes.
Ebert says of this, as nearly as I can tell, the deputy chief is in the movie for only one purpose: to be consistently wrong at every step of the way and to provide a phony counterpoint to Willis' progress. The character is so willfully useless, so dumb, so much a product of the idiot plot syndrome, that all by himself he successfully undermines the last half of the movie. Without the deputy chief and all that he represents, Die Hard would have been a more than passable thriller. With him, it's a mess, and that's a shame. And Karen James of the New York Times is slightly more positive, but she has a similar complaint. So she says, Die Hard, the movie that gambles a $5 million salary on Bruce Willis, has to be the most excessive film around. It piles every known element of the action genre onto the flimsy story of a New York cop who rescues hostages from a Los Angeles office tower on Christmas Eve. Partly an interracial buddy movie, partly the sentimental tale of a ruptured marriage. The strange thing is, it works. Die Hard is exceedingly stupid, but escapist fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. So both Ebert and this reviewer thought that the film was stupid, and that to the extent that it worked, it was because it had good performances and it was like proficiently, or even, like very well directed, and the stunts were cool, but it's actually like a relatively stupid film.
Yeah, it's undermined by the stupidity of the plot.
And I'm going to argue
dialogue.
that it's a quite cerebral, intelligent film.
Well, and we'll just know Predator, although more negatively reviewed than Die Hard, the reviews are similar, the contemporaneous reviews, in that their criticisms are often just that it's exceedingly dumb and simplistic.
Stupid machismo bombast. Now, here's an interesting tidbit before getting into this that almost makes you lose confidence in Ebert, despite the fact that he was one of the great reviewers. Somehow, Ebert gave Die Hard 2 3 stars and Die Hard 1 2 stars. How the fuck you could do that is beyond me. I mean, I was just utterly perplexed by this.
Well, Die Hard 2 thankfully doesn't have Dwayne Robinson.
Dude, it has an even stupider
I know.
character.
Yes, agreed.
Anyway.
So to start the film, as I noted, we have this image of the 747 landing and then the close-up of this salesman talking to McClane. And I think the dialogue here is extremely well written because, again, we're introduced to the character of John McClane immediately, and we're aware of the fact that he's not just some hyper masculine badass. The salesman can see that he's clearly afraid of flying, and he admits as much, right?
Right, and this is great because this does 2 things, right? It tells us, well, it does everything. I mean, the scene's very, it's become my favorite term, economical, because it does set up McClane. It tells us that he's not like some stereotypical action hero because he's afraid of flying. It tells us that he's a cop because he says, trust me, I've been doing this for X amount of years. And also, it gives us a reason for his eventual barefootedness.
Yes.
Because this guy tells him the secret to surviving air travel is to take off your shoes and like with your bare feet make what, fists in the
fist
carpet.
on the carpet.
Right. Why this would work, who knows, but it does set this up.
Yes. Another interesting thing that it sets up when he's getting off of the plane is he has this brief bump in with a flight attendant who is clearly sexually attracted to him.
Yes.
And he has a bit of a wistful look on his face. And that is an interesting theme throughout the film, as he often likes to gawk at attractive females.
Yeah, so he's interesting because he's throughout this series, like he's this sort of healthy monogamous man, right? Who really wants to maintain his relationship with his wife, but he's also depicted as irresistible to other women.
Right.
Remember in the second one, he's like, just the facts, ma'am.
When he's getting hit on.
Yeah. So and also he obviously is depicted as like a typical middle class male who would like, there's the girls calendar, and I think he kisses it and said girls or something.
He taps his hand on it.
Yeah. So he's not some feminist who's going to criticize the appearance of beautiful women.
to use the terminology or the kind of film criticism of perhaps a woke critic, his heterosexuality is established immediately by his
and actually his discomfort perhaps with alternative sexualities as we go out, because we learn. So he gets a limo with Argyle, so this young black man, after he lands the plane or whatever. And again, this does a really good job of setting up the whole story, right? So he's conversing with Argyle, and it's realistic because we see that McClane is a taciturn guy. He doesn't want to talk about shit, and Argyle's just yapping. And he says that he yaps because he used to be a cab driver and people expected chit chat. And we get out of McClane that his wife is in Los Angeles and he's a cop from New York. So we kind of have this fish out of the water story of this guy who goes from New York to Los Angeles, similar to Beverly Hills Cop, which is about a cop from Detroit, Alex Foley, played by Eddie Murphy, who goes to Los Angeles. It's interesting because they do it 2 times. I think he says California, John McClane does, and he's like bemused by it. But a lot of the humor, so-called humor, I'm not a huge fan of Beverly Hills Cop, but a lot of the humor supposedly is just from looking at this Hollywood, the sort of degenerate moral world from Foley's view, and just how he's trying to cope with that. So
and I think I'll just read a bit of the dialogue with Argyle, because it is exceptionally well done. So Argyle asks him why he didn't move out west with his wife, and McClane has this kind of pompous, like morally righteous answer, where he says, well, I'm a New York cop who used to be a New York kid, and I got 6 months backlog of New York scumbags I'm still trying to put behind bars. And then Argyle kind of sees through the bullshit and just says, you mean you thought she wouldn't make it out here and she'd be crawling on back, so why bother to pack? And then instead of getting upset, McClane kind of has this smirk on his face, and he says, like I said, Argyle, you're fast. So he acknowledges that, yes, in fact, he figured she would just fail and come back to him.
Right. And also we get, another thing that this sets up is that McClane is a likable guy, right? So he doesn't get mad about it. In fact, he's pretty self-aware, right? And he is later in the film. So he realizes that he's a stubborn jackass sometimes.
Right. And we're also introduced to one of the main characters of the film, which is the Nakatomi Plaza, where all of the action takes place. Right. So it's this sleek glass skyscraper, right? And when we're introduced to it, like on the interior, we see we're also introduced to this character, Harry Ellis, who
Wait,
is
before getting to Ellis, there's one scene. So McClane, or do they cut to the party first? Probably. I guess they
yeah,
probably cut to the party first. So yeah, we're at this party, this Christmas party for the Nakatomi Corporation. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And we're introduced to Harry Ellis, who is immediately annoying. So he's
Dude, also immediately awesome, you mean?
right. So he's
Played by Hart Brock, by the way.
just an amusing character.
Yes.
He's clearly this kind of send up of a 1980s Wall Street raider corporate titan type,
Right.
like some smug asshole who likes to do a lot of blow.
Yeah, he's sort of like the failed version of Gordon Gekko in some
Yeah.
sense. Was
Yes.
interesting because the actor who depicted Harry Ellis said McTiernan wanted him to play it like very smooth Cary Grant like, and Brock was playing it as like this this insecure, coke-addled, pompous jackass who like clearly incompetent. And so he kept doing that, and McTiernan was getting pissed about it apparently. And then on the first day, I guess they rehearsed the scene, and some of the people were looking at the footage and they were laughing about it. And then McTiernan went over and looked at it, and then he came back and said, yeah, just go with whatever you've got. So that's how we get this character whom Bill Simmons described as somebody doing one of the people on the Rewatchables podcast, maybe it wasn't Simmons, but they described it as somebody doing a Dennis Miller impression, doing a character, which is very, very apropos, very accurate, I think.
Right. So basically then in these opening scenes, we're introduced to the few characters, and then John McClane gets dropped off at the Nakatomi building where he's trying to find his wife, Holly McClane. Now we know that she's using the name Holly Gennaro. He does not. And also importantly, Argyle tells him when he drops him off from the limo that he'll wait to hear from him before he goes.
Yeah, so this sets up that McClane and Argyle have a bit of a rapport now. So Argyle blasts the rap music at one point, and McClane says, "Don't you have any Christmas music?" And Argyle says, "This is Christmas music."
Right.
So they're sort of I mean, you could have a film that's just Argyle and McClane, who are these two completely different people put together, and then develop a rapport. And that's one of the things about the Die Hard that's so great, is that there are lots of interesting characters and interesting relationships. None of them are just wasted, except for maybe one that we'll talk about. But so we have
and also
McClane develops, and McClane's like, "You're all right, Argyle," and I think Argyle says, "Remember that when you give me a tip," or whatever.
Right. There's a lot of interracial homosocial bonding with McClane in the film, right? So it is interesting that he actually has like two important relationships with other Black males in the film.
Yeah,
right?
I'm going to say I doubt that's important, and that I don't think there was anything, any social commentary in those decisions.
Probably not, but it certainly gives fodder for
I think Argyle you could see as, I mean, Reginald Val Johnson, the L character, you could easily see played by anybody, right? Anybody who has that kind of sort of paternal concern for another person.
Do you know if they were at all influenced by Lethal Weapon and the interracial pairing there?
No, I don't know. And I don't. So Lethal Weapon came out in 87, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because you can see the similarities between Die Hard and Lethal Weapon. And I haven't read anything about the influence of Lethal Weapon on Die Hard. I personally, so our friend Jamie Palmer thinks that Lethal Weapon is the better Christmas film.
Oh, no.
I personally think Die Hard is vastly superior to Lethal Weapon.
Yes. So well, no, I mean, maybe there's nothing to be read into the decision to have McClane's bonds be with black men, but it's there and
Yeah.
obviously fair game for critical fodder.
Right.
So McClane then goes into the Nakatomi building, and he's on this first floor, and they have some fancy computer system that you know type in the person's name who you're looking for. This is important because it allows him to find out that his wife is using the last name Gennaro, because he types in McClane,
Right.
no names pop up.
But this is also stupid.
It's very
because-
stupid, which I'll know. So
Yeah.
then he types in Gennaro, he finds her and he says, Jesus Christ. But what's interesting is that the guy who's like the security guard on the first floor says, oh, the party, they're the only ones left in the building. So he really didn't even need to type in the name to find out where
Right.
Holly was, because
Right.
she could only be in one place.
Right.
And then he gets into, makes it to the 30th floor, gets into this party, and he's almost immediately kissed by another man. And then he makes his second Jesus fucking California quip.
Right.
Right. So again, we're getting this idea that he doesn't understand the loose morals and mores of degenerate California.
Yeah, and this is a weird theme because it's really not important for the film, because it's
No.
going to be a film in which he's just trapped in this building with these other people who also aren't from California, right?
Right.
That is the quote unquote terrorist. And so it's almost as if you could have made this entirely different film just about this New York cop who's out of water in Los Angeles. And they hint at that a couple of times, but then there's nothing else about that.
Right. It is not a developed theme in the movie. So
Also, a question I had that I couldn't figure out here. So Holly doesn't know if McClane's coming.
yes.
Holly being McClane's wife, but they're living separately now. She's
Yes.
living in Los Angeles. And they set this up because she calls her kid or talks to her
Daughter.
like assistant or whatever working at the house.
Yeah.
And McClane talks to Takagi, who's the boss, and basically, he's like, Takagi's like, did you enjoy the limo, etc. So who invited McClane? Like, how did this work? Did Takagi? It almost sounds as if Takagi invited him.
Right.
Why wouldn't McClane tell Holly, yeah, of course I'm coming? Like, it's just kind of weird, right?
Right. So Takagi lets McClane know, or we become aware as the viewer, that it was Takagi who paid for the flight and the limo, because McClane, he says when he first meets Argyle, I've never ridden a limo before, because he's this working class dude. So then we
Right.
find out how he was able to ride in the limo.
Right.
But apparently McClane didn't tell his wife that, yeah, I'm taking advantage of all of this first class service from
Right.
the CEO of your company.
Yeah, doesn't really make sense. Does
No, it does not. Now, so he then McClane, when he's talking to Takagi, there's this other interesting line. So McClane tells Takagi, you throw quite a party. I didn't know they celebrated Christmas in Japan. And then Takagi responds, hey, we're flexible. Pearl Harbor didn't work out. We got you with tape decks. So this is a very
Yes.
contrived like dialogue. First of all, they're in the United States at a company with mostly US workers. I don't know what not celebrating Christmas in Japan would have to do with your corporate culture in the United States.
Right. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
And secondly, the comment, like, can you imagine you just meet this guy and his comment is, yeah, we tried to bomb you in Pearl Harbor, and now we're just taking you over with take
It
dubs.
shows that Takagi has a sense of humor. It also illustrates something about the kind of late 70s, 80s paranoia about the Japanese out competing the United States
Right.
and sort of taking over. I mean, it's interesting that Blade Runner, it's like the Japanese who have completely bought up and owned Los Angeles in the original Blade Runner movie. So this is a kind of theme that works throughout. I kind of think it's funny. I mean, it's not like a particularly realistic line, but actually it's interesting because the movie has a lot of cultural clash, right? Because it has European terrorists, America, and then the Japanese here that set up just a little bit, at least. It's not really played out that much.
Even within the United States, you have the kind of clash
and then
between
New York and Los Angeles.
Yeah, there's a class-based clash, and there's a New York, Los Angeles clash.
And also we should note that Michael, I think it's Michael Commons, the name of the person who wrote the score for the film. So because this plays, we first hear some of the score other than the Run DMC music and the Argyle's Limo. We first hear this Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, fourth part of the fourth movement, Ninth Symphony, which is Ode to Joy, better known as Ode to Joy. The interesting thing about, and what I love about this score, is that it takes parts from that, themes from it, and plays it a little bit differently. So basically, you have the actual Beethoven musical piece, and then Common takes it and riffs off of it throughout the film. And in fact, in one scene, Gruber is humming, Hans Gruber, whom we will get to, is humming the Ode to Joy. So that plays throughout. So it's an excellent, interesting, in a way, meta score, because the characters in the film are aware of it at times, and sometimes it's coming from the outside and is used very ironically.
Right.
Or it's non-diegetic, as the intellectuals would say.
That's what I would definitely say. So then we have this kind of the first meeting in between Holly and John, right?
Yes.
And then Harry Ellis, coked up Harry, they walk into this room, and he's finishing doing his blow. Now, this is this is another kind of silly scene. So Harry is in Holly Gennaro's office. Yes. They open the door, he's doing blow, but there's some dialogue, not maybe 5 minutes after this, where we find out that Harry has his own private bathroom. So rather than go to his own private bathroom to do blow,
he decides to do it in Holly's office.
Nevertheless, there's some dialogue between Harry, Takagi, Holly, and John. What's important in this scene, I think the most important dialogue is that Harry really wants Holly to show John her Rolex.
Yes.
As a sign of her success with the corporation.
Right.
Right.
And this is, I mean, there are a couple of things that are interesting here. One thing is apparently there was this whole thing about watches that was cut out. So I was thinking like how much of the film is like watch symbolism or something, because this is probably the end of the second act. Gruber and McClane confront each other, and you try to figure out, how does McClane know that it's a terrorist, or quote unquote terrorist? And apparently it was from the watches, because all of them had the same watch and they like synchronized them. And there was a scene where they did that, but they cut it for various technical reasons. So that's one thing. And so there's watches there. Also, I read that the one argument, I think McTiernan said this, was that so McClane's accoutrement is a wedding ring, which symbolizes, of course, his marriage, whereas Holly's is a Rolex, which symbolizes her job, which is the important thing to her until the end when that comes off, and we'll talk about that. So that's another thing where there may be symbolism with this Rolex.
Right. And then Holly and John John asks for a place to wash up, so they go to the bathroom, and Holly and John have a pleasant conversation. It begins pleasantly.
Right.
And then John brings up the fact that she's using the last name Gennaro instead of McClane. And they have a little bit of a spat in this bathroom.
Yes.
Now, this is another scene where we see the nice self-awareness of McClane, because when Holly leaves the bathroom, John chides himself. He says, "That was great, John. Good job. Very mature." He realizes that he's being kind of an asshole, and he's irrationally resentful of her success and her using her maiden name and to fit in more with this corporate culture.
Right. And we should note too, so because we're going to transition from here, I think, to the so-called the quote unquote ironic terrorists or thieves.
Yes.
Before getting there, so we've had this scene of the Christmas party in the Nakatomi building. This was actually a set. So some of the floors were actually in this building and they shot in it. This particular floor was a set that they built. And the architecture was, I mean, directly ripped off pretty much from Frank Lloyd Wright. So there's really a beautiful architecture here in this particular floor. And another thing that's very well done by McTiernan here is we get the sense of space in this building that we're going to be stuck in. And it's very understandable. We know where we are. We have these stairways, we have certain floors, we have the shafts, and we have the elevator, right? And this is very well done and established, unlike a lot of other action films that seem to delight in confusing you about what the hell is going on or where the characters are in space.
Yeah, it has a kind of claustrophobic feel to it.
Yes. So we get the terrorists now, right? So these terrorists, we get Theo and the other guy first?
Yeah, we get Theo, and then we're introduced to Hans. Well, first
he comes later, right? Because they come in, and Theo. So we get this African American, and we find out he's kind of like the computer whiz with glasses. So he's talking about some basketball game. So people have tried to figure out what game he's referring to.
This is just as another note. So these terrorists are, or at least Theo and Hans, who are the sophisticated of the group, the sophisticates. They're kind of these ironic figures who really loathe American culture. And so it happens a couple of times in the film. The way that they kind of make fun of Americans is through their obsession with silly sports.
Well, that's just one. Yeah. So
just one. Yes.
Right. It's that's what's amusing is that you have these terrorists, quote again, whatever. We'll just call them terrorists because that's what they want you to think they are for the time being.
Right.
So you have these terrorists, and they're a motley assortment. There are Germans, there's this
French guy,
African American dude, and Hans, and two of them at least. Theo, well, actually more, because there's the guy he's like, dang, I bet money on this game.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So there's this other guy, and they're these kind of they're these urbane, sophisticated people who actually have contempt for American culture. They're almost like Humbert and Lolita. I was thinking, like, where a lot of Lolita is just like mocking American consumer culture from this sophisticated, who's actually a depraved character too. And that's the same thing here. And yes, so he's talking about Kareem or something, but really we get the sense that there's this ironic criticism of American culture.
Right. But importantly, it's not actually a criticism of real American culture. It's a criticism of their highly filtered view of American like lowbrow pop culture.
Yes.
So they come in and they kill the security guard on the first floor.
Right. And I think it's important that they immediately they show this like cold heartedly just killing this guy.
Yes.
Because we know right away they're not fucking around and they have no
Yes.
qualms about killing people.
Yeah, so they take him out quickly and replace him. So they have one of their members puts on the security outfit or suit and then takes the chair on the first floor. And then they make it up to the 30th floor and bust into this party with
up the way Gruber is humming so he's humming Ode to Joy and he hums it throughout this scene. And also this is Alan Rickman's debut, which is
film debut.
Believable that Alan Rickman's film debut is as Hans Gruber,
and
the all-time best action villain in history.
Yeah, so Alan Rickman before this was known for his virtuoso stage play acting, right?
Yes.
And a very sophisticated actor. And in fact, I think the first time he saw the script of the film, he just thought it was twaddle, right? It's like, what is this?
Which is great, actually, for the character that he plays.
It is.
Right.
So they enter this party, and then I think this is interesting because Hans opens this little leather bound notebook and reads this statement to the guests at the party, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, so he quiets them down and says, due to the Nakatomi Corporation's legacy of greed around the globe, they're about to be taught a lesson in the real use of power. You will be witnesses. But notably, he delivers these lines in a canned manner. Like he's not very serious about what he's saying here.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. And this actually, though, this runs out throughout too, is that Gruber mocks terrorists and he mocks the way that Americans deal with terrorists, because at one point he's like, I read about it in Time magazine.
Yes. Yeah.
So he's sort of feigning that he's a terrorist.
Right. He's kind of mocking stereotypical terrorists. And we do find out later in the film that he was actually expelled from a German terrorist organization.
And in the book, they were terrorists. So this changes from they were terrorists to they're not in here, but he's actually mocking terrorists.
And so importantly as well, McTiernan noted that when he was doing the film, he didn't want to do this action film about these stereotypical left-wing terrorists taking over like a building and getting stopped by some conservative right-wing superhero type. So I think this is just kind of playing around with those tropes in an interesting way. But we immediately know that Hans is kind of half-hearted about his
something
ostensible reason here.
It seems very performative.
Yes. And so the first thing that Hans needs to do after settling these guests down is he wants to find Joseph Takagi.
It's Takagi.
Yeah, Takagi.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yes. So, and he apparently has read a dossier on Takagi, but is unaware of what he looks like. So he kind of he kind of reads through Takagi's history. Now, this dialogue is nice because it lets us know how fastidious Hans is, but it also fills in background about Takagi.
And we find who Takagi is, and it tells us about the level of preparation that Hans puts in,
which didn't include finding out what Takagi looked like,
apparently, or he's so racist all Japanese look the same, right? Or some people have argued,
or they're kind of, or he really did know who Takagi was, and he's kind of playing with the stereotype that white people can't recognize Asians.
Right.
We don't know exactly what's going on, but again, it does fill this role of giving us the background of Joseph Takagi.
Right. And we should say, like, Hans' character, although his motivations are unveiled in time, his character, just like McClane's, is introduced so expertly that so we grasp the kind of person this is. With, as you said, he's very fastidious, very assiduous in his planning. Also, very shortly, he's walking after he gets to Cocky, and he's looking around. Oh, he's in the elevator first, and he says, "Nice
Right.
suit, John Phillips, London, or whatever. I have two myself." So we we know this very sophisticated guy. He knows men's fashion, and presumably a John Phillips suit is a very expensive suit. And then he also very shortly after this quotes Plutarch when he says, "When Alexander saw the breadth of his domain, he wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer." And then he kind of chuckles and he says, "Benefits of a classical education."
And this is really interesting dialogue. I want to call attention to it because Hans is, his whole kind of shtick here is that he's this super sophisticated, debonair guy.
Yes.
He quotes Alexander, he mocks pop culture and American culture, says he's quoting Plutarch's Life of Alexander, right?
Well, he doesn't say he's quoting it.
Well,
he never says what he's quoting. He says benefits of a classical education.
Right. So we as the viewer think he's quoting some like ancient Greek. We don't know who it's supposed to be, Plutarch, except the quote actually is not from Plutarch. It is a quote that was taken from an episode of The Twilight Zone in 1963 of late, I think, of Cliffordville. Now, what's interesting about that is you have this guy who's extolling his own classical education, mocking American culture. Meanwhile, he quotes some line from American culture and fucks up his classical education.
I guess the question is, did they know that they filched this from the Twilight Zone and not from Plutarch?
I don't know.
And it's sort of sending up the Hans character, or did they think they were
actually quoting Plutarch?
Yes.
I like the idea that they did this deliberately, and it's kind of mocking Hans' own pretensions to to being this erudite figure.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the wiki quote, it says Hans claims it's from Plutarch, but he doesn't claim it's from Plutarch.
No, he doesn't. Maybe that gets cut or something. But regardless, it is amusing that he's actually quoting the Twilight Zone, which is like quintessential American pop culture.
And he seems very aware of American pop culture. Now, he would presumably, he acts as though it's sort of this ironic way. Maybe it's not.
And in fact, there are multiple instances throughout the movie where he actually doesn't recognize what are rudimentary pop cultural references, right?
Such as
he doesn't recognize when McClane makes a reference to Jeopardy, and also when we'll get to the other one later because I think it's more interesting.
At any rate, I think the way I would read this is he's actually trying to quote something about Alexander the Great, and he's showing his erudition and that he was this classically educated man. I like that reading better because it has him again as this very interesting, sophisticated character who's an elitist.
I like the more pastiche postmodern reading of Hans.
Okay, fair enough. So at any rate, I have the more Humbert reading of Hans as this very arrogant, educated man who has nothing but contempt for American culture.
I like the reading of he has nothing but contempt for American culture, but he's so influenced by it that he can't escape from it.
That's fair. But at any rate, so we get this, we know who this guy is, where he's very impressive, and Rickman just, holy shit, can he create this kind of urbane person, this European sophisticated man of the world really well. And also they set up the absolute ruthlessness of Hans as well, because they quickly, we have them, they're at this table, they are,
yeah, so he's captured Takagi.
Yes, and they're trying to get this code from Takagi, and this is actually a very humorous scene, and the humor is underplayed, and that's what I like about this scene. So it's also very well directed. They have this these push-in shots that are very effective, coming in at Rickman and in at Takagi. So they're trying to get this password from Takagi.
Well, before that, just important, because they continue to play on play off of these kind of stereotypical terrorist tropes, because Takagi, they're talking about him developing the corporation in Indonesia, and Takagi says, contrary to what you people may think, we're going to develop that region, not exploit it. And then Hans responds, I believe you. I read the article in Forbes, right?
Yes. So Hans this also sets up, because he says he's like yeah, I mean, it sets up your idea that he's a consumer of America. Yes, right. He's a consumer of American culture, even though he claims to despise it, because also he reads Time magazine as well.
Also in this scene, he delivers the line really well, because you can actually tell that he doesn't give a shit one way or the other about what they're going to do in Indonesia.
Right, and in fact, Takagi at one point says to him, like, what kind of terrorist are you? And Hans' response is to chuckle and say, who said we were terrorists? Now, this is interesting, because it actually reveals exactly what they're after very quickly. Like, you could imagine McTiernan being like, this is going to be a mystery.
Right.
As he does with who's McClane's wife, which I don't like, but we'll talk about that. But he doesn't. He reveals it right away. And actually, there were, you can look at some of the outtakes, like, I don't know if Rickman was just riffing a little bit or if they had this in the script. Rickman answers in a couple of ways. So in one of the outtakes, he says, we're capitalist terrorists, which I don't think works as well. I actually like this one. He just chuckles and says, who said we were terrorists? And then he puts a gun to Takagi's head and basically says, you have 3 seconds. I'm going to count to 3. You give us that code. And then,
so just to be clear, they want the code to this vault so that they can get $640 million in negotiable bearer bonds. Now, just as a note about the bearer bonds, why mention that? So these were often used by criminals and terrorists because they were untrackable and you had to pay it to whoever had them.
Right. I mean,
so we won't get into the technical, like, who cares? I mean, it's just a MacGuffin, right?
Right. It doesn't matter. I mean, the 20% on the bearer bonds, no, you're not going to be collecting that, but whatever. It doesn't matter. That's what they, because that's what, so Hans says, we're not interested in this. We're interested in the $640 million in bearer bonds. And then he's threatening to shoot him, and you see Theo says, told you, and then he gives his count and he shoots Takagi, which is a very surprising scene, like, because Takagi's kind of been set up and you really sympathize with him. So Hans immediately shows how ruthless he is, and the movie once again shows you it's willing to shock you and to go against your expectations.
Although the scene, it's strange that he shoots Takagi, because the entire plan of getting the bearer bonds, and we'll see, it's this elaborate plan where they never needed Takagi's code.
Well, it was quicker to get it from him. Was the point. So and the thing that's funny here is what had happened evidently is that Theo and Carl had made a bet about whether Takagi would give them the code, or whether Hans would have to shoot him. Hans shoots him, and then we see Carl just in the background give some money to Theo, right? We see the shot of him giving money, so he lost the bet. This is also something about the editing style here with McTiernan. I don't know. I'm assuming McTiernan had control over the cut. when they shoot Takagi, we cut immediately to to the back of it. We don't see the front of the shot. We see the back of it. What we see is McClane's reaction to it.
Mhm.
And this is something that McTiernan does at least a couple of times during the film, which is he doesn't show you the sort of important thing. Instead, we see the reaction from a character to the thing, which is an interesting way of doing it. And in fact, they did shoot it from the front, and you can see that they have this as an outtake as well. And it is much more effective the way they edited it, where you don't see that shooting.
Okay. So we cut to John McClane, who's escaped into, he was in the bathroom, so he wasn't immediately caught. And then he moves to a different floor.
Yep.
And this establishes or runs with this theme of him not being this hypo machismo, like, Gary Cooper, who's come in to clean everything up. He says to himself, Argyle, tell me you heard the shots. You're calling the police right now. Right. So he really wants the police to get in on this. He realizes that he's but one person. He's not a superhero. He's not going to be able to stop these people by himself. And he even further says, why the fuck didn't you stop him, John? Because then you'd be dead too, asshole. Right. Then he's like, think, goddamn it, think. Like, he's trying to figure this out. He's clearly psychologically rattled. And I really like the idea of having the character have this running dialogue with himself. Right. And again, noting the serendipity here, this would absolutely not work if you had a less charming or self-aware type actor.
Right. So so that's an interesting thing about the way the end product is here with Willis as the actor, is that you get a very, although he's sort of reluctant to talk about his personal shit, you get a very garrulous character, right? You could see that if you had Stallone play this character, you'd probably cut out all of these kinds of lines, and you would make it this much more Clint Eastwood type, man with no name, relatively reticent action hero. Right. But instead you get this guy who's talking to himself like a normal dude. And the thing that this also does for a viewer is you're watching him and you're trying to think the way he is. You're like, what would I do? And he's kind of telling you, and he goes through this, like, think, God damn it, what to do. And he like, so he's going to spend 30 minutes here trying to get the police to come. Right. And sort of illustrating that he's not this one-man hero, or he doesn't want to be. He's a very reluctant hero. This was, I would say, like, Willis made a very good decision here in how he said he was going to play him. He wanted to play McClane as a reluctant hero who did not want to get involved. And I think that's a very good decision. So he pulls a fire alarm instead. He's on the 32nd floor, I think. So he pulls a fire alarm to try to get the police to come.
Right.
Right.
And the terrorist group led by Hans Gruber sends this Tony guy up to kill him.
A thing, yes. And this sets up as well this sort of tension running through the film that's kind of comical, that Gruber is smarter than other than Theo and this other guy. Gruber's smarter than the people he's working with. Right. And he has this plan worked out and they don't understand it. And he's constantly having to tell them to stop fucking around or don't worry about this or whatever.
He has an air of superiority, not just toward American culture, but toward the other individuals who are working on this robbery.
Right.
Like he condescends them. He's kind of sickened by their puerility.
Right. And he's just like, let the cops fuck around. Let this go through. Who cares? You go up and look for him. So this kind of plays out through the film.
Right. Now, Tony gets sent up and John grabs him. And this dialogue is kind of interesting to me. Yes. So John says, drop it, dickhead. It's the police. Tony, you won't hurt me. John, yeah, why not? Tony, because you're a policeman, there are rules for policemen. John, yeah, that's what my captain keeps telling me. So in this dialogue, he kind of is using this standard issue, Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry, like, I'm a badass, maybe I don't follow the rules, bravado.
Yes, he is. But so I've thought this through quite a bit, and I don't have a coherent answer yet. But there, so in Dirty Harry, which we talked about, I guess 2 weeks ago, there's the cop and there's this incompetent, like kind of leftist bureaucracy that cares too much about rules, etc. And that's kind of what this dialogue is getting at, right? Is like you have these rules that you're bound to. It sounds exactly like something you would get in a Dirty Harry movie.
Right,
And Dirty Harry would say, yeah, they keep trying to fucking rein me in, but I can't be reined in.
right,
But what's weird here is that, as we'll find, the actual incompetence of the police bureaucracy is that they are completely tied to these machismo rules of engagement, and they follow them as if they are shackled to them, so much so that the criminals know all, Gruber does. He knows exactly what they're going to do, and in fact uses that against them.
yeah. And McClane even has, he even says at one point, no, you macho assholes, no.
Right. So he's criticizing them for, in fact, being too trying to solve things through violence in some sense, right?
Not being cerebral.
Right, which is weird because a lot of people like Richard Brody in his I watched Die Hard for the first time, terrible. Just makes you think, does Brody understand film? Because he's like, this is all about redemption through violence. But what's weird about it is, in some ways, it's much more, no, it's about using your head. And in fact, the way McClane wins here is by using his head throughout the film and coming up with these kind of tricky things. And we can see that he's smarter than other people in the film. And that's what actually saves him.
Right.
So yeah, it is weird because the criticism of these police and then the FBI especially is that they're too quick to violence and too aggressive and too, in a sense, right wing. So I don't know exactly what this line is doing in here.
Yeah,
one could argue it's actually like inconsistent with the theme of the film.
Right. I'm not sure either. And I agree with your point. So in Dirty Harry, it's the liberal bureaucracy and they're feckless and impotent and insufficiently masculine. In Die Hard, most of the time the theme is, the establishment is too like muscular right wing and macho, and that's what fucks it up. So in both films, you have a searing criticism of authority, but for very different reasons,
and
I think
opposite reasons.
Right. And I think it would be fair to see that, and I think McTiernan thought this as this criticism of Reaganism, of that kind of Reagan machismo, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like clearly,
Right, and that gets into that this is also a criticism and a satire of these 80s action films that are like, fuck yeah, military, send the guys in and we'll just take care of it through violence. Because in fact, when they resort to the violence, they get absolutely screwed, as we'll see. So I think the line is sort of a lingering residue that they probably should have caught. That's how I see. I think it would have been better because, in fact, McClane is trying to get the police to come, and his complaint of the police is that they're being too macho.
Right.
And
the real strength that he has as an officer and as a person is his doggedness and stubbornness. There's no real indication that he's like an excessively violent cop such as Harry Callahan. It's more that he's just really tenacious and dogged and annoying, perhaps.
And to the extent that he's anti-authoritarian, because he is, but his anti-authority is the opposite from Harry's, right? Because he doesn't like the whole FBI blow shit up, get shit done, motherfucker.
Right.
That's like the anti-authoritarian criticism in the film, and I think that's what McTiernan saw. But maybe what happens is you just have McTiernan like hates authority quite clearly.
Right.
Like maybe he doesn't care too much where it's coming from, because you can kind of see in Die Hard 3, he also hates authority. That's a McTiernan directed that one, and the cops fuck shit up sometimes too. So it's maybe thematically a bit inconsistent, I guess.
Yes.
But there is like, obviously this is anti-authoritarian strain running through the film.
Right. So
also this sets up some fuck up, like probably one of the most the most criticizable components to the action in the film, which is many times somebody has another character has a gun pointed against their face, which if you have a gun, the whole point is you can stand 10 feet away so they don't attack you. But they always come like right up to them, have a gun in their face, talk instead of kill the person, and then they have to get into a protracted wrestling fight to solve the problem instead of just shooting the person.
Yes. So John eventually kills Tony, and then so he's barefoot, and he takes Tony's shoes and he puts them on, and they're too small. So he says 9 million terrorists in the world, and I got to kill one with feet smaller than my sister. So we can see that he's unable to get shoes, so he's still barefoot.
I like this, that they had the sort of intelligence to make him try to get shoes, right? A lot of lesser films, they just forget about it or whatever. But in this one, he actually wants to get some fucking shoes on. He just can't because they're too small.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then he sends Tony down the elevator.
But wait, before that, we have this great, or maybe is it after this that we have this line from Hans where he's like, he won't be joining us for the rest of his life?
Yeah, I think that's after.
Okay.
No, so John puts a Santa Claus hat on Tony, and then writes.
This is a Christmas film, and this is one illustration of this.
Yeah, we'll get to that at the very end as well. So and then he writes on the sweater that Tony is wearing, now I have a machine gun, ho, ho, ho. And he's sending him down the elevator. And then I think Hans makes this comment before the elevator arrives on the 30th floor.
So Hans says something about how, this can go however you want it, but like Takagi didn't cooperate, therefore he won't be joining us for the rest of his life.
Just
fucking, and it's funny because Hans is not like this joke cracking type. He's not like a wise ass the way McClane is. So this joke is so much funnier because of how he says it. Yes. And then we have McClane showing how smart McClane is. He gets on the top of the elevator when he sends this down with this guy's body. Mm-hmm. And we have this just absolutely hilarious line reading from Gruber where he's like, he reads what the sweater says, and then he's like, ho, ho, ho. Like he can't say it. And this is also a sort of running joke that Rickman does really well. So he imitates an American accent, as we'll get to. And then the way he says motherfucker, motherfucker is really funny. So he's a good job of playing with his voice for humor. But as he's talking, McClane's on top of the elevator and he's writing down people's names. So he's getting information from this. Now, if you're alone in this building and you're going up against all these terrorists, not clear that it's actually a wise idea to mock them and to show that you're alive somewhere, right? Which is what he's doing with this body.
Yes, it seems like an example of excessive macho bravado.
Yes.
But nevertheless, it's
funny still.
It's funny, and I wouldn't cut it from the film.
No, I wouldn't either.
At all.
Absolutely not.
So we also during right around this time, I think we have some important dialogue between Harry Ellis, the Coke dude, and Holly, because we get to the theme that Harry is pissed off that John is fucking up whatever is happening, because
Right.
Harry thinks he can do a better job of it. So Holly tells him, I think this is John who's at work here.
Mhm.
And then Harry says, John, he can fuck this whole thing up. What does he think he's doing? His job? Bullshit. His job's 3,000 miles away. Without him, we still have a chance to get out of here.
Right. So,
So
Harry's pissed off. What's interesting about this, as we'll see, though, is that Harry's kind of turns out to be a bit of a hero for reasons I will illustrate later. Even though you kind of don't like him here, and yeah, he's getting irritated, and he eventually loses his patience, right? So he's like, "Why is John fucking this stuff up?" He
Right.
wants to negotiate because that's what he does, basically.
Yes.
Right?
He negotiates $1 million deals for breakfast.
Right. And then we get this. There's somehow we get this action scene after this where these people, two people, right, find McClane. He shoots one, and then he rolls under this very elaborate table. I'm not sure what this table would be used for, because it's a very oddly shaped tables. And then this is a good scene, though, because this guy's McClane didn't shoot him, and this guy's shooting at McClane, who's rolling under this table. Very effective action scene. And then he gets to the end, and he says to McClane, next time you have a chance, you shoot somebody, basically. And then you see McClane unload through the table and hit him like 7 times or something. And then he says, "Thanks for the advice," which is sticking with this kind of 80s one-liners, which McClane has more than enough of them. But the difference is, one, I think they're aware there's some humor to it, but some irony to it. But also, two, McClane's one-liners are funny, right? He actually has good one-liners, and Willis delivers them really well.
Yes. And then we have, John's trying to call an emergency line, right?
Yes.
And he gets
right.
this female police operator.
So this is keeping with the theme. McClane's still trying to get the police there, right?
Yeah, he's still trying to get the police, because actually when he triggered the fire alarm, the police were sent, but they were called off.
Right.
So he's still trying to get the attention of the police. He gets this female operator, and she says, "Attention, whoever you are, this channel is reserved for emergency calls only." And then we hear John screaming, and this is a really amusing line as well. And he says, "No fucking shit, lady. Do I sound like I'm ordering a pizza?"
Right.
Now, I promise, as delivered in the film, it's humor.
This is where Willis is a better actor than either of us. And this is another one where McTiernan made a good decision about, we don't see Willis delivering this line. We actually see it. The edit is such that it's actually in the operator, wherever the operator is, right? Mm-hmm. So we see it from their point of view. And yes, it is funny as it plays on the screen.
So that's how get introduced to L. Powell, who is the like kind of second buddy of John McClane. So the police say, "Well, see if there's a black and white that can do a drive-by here." Right. And so L. Powell, we're introduced to him. He's in a fast food market getting junk food. There's some banter between him and the cashier about his dietary habits.
But
being
this
a police officer.
What's excellent about this, and I think you can compare it to Casablanca or something, in the sense that all of the characters are interesting, right? So even this character, the way he's introduced, we get him. He's at and also it does a good job of setting up the space of the area they're in, because he's at this convenience market or whatever. He's buying Twinkies, and we get this. The guy who's checking him out is basically mocking him, and he's saying, "Oh, my wife's pregnant," and the guy's like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And then he goes out of the market and looks at the Nakatomi building. So we get this sense of like space of where he is relative to the Nakatomi building, right?
Yes. Yeah. And we also have somewhere around here, we have the scene where McClane runs by this nude calendar for the second time and then pats his hand on it and says, "Girls."
Now, this is actually, the calendar's useful in that it's a marker of location, right? So we know that spot and where it is relative, because we know that calendar is there.
And then there's a extremely famous shot from the film where we don't need to get into all of the details, but he's in an air duct, right?
Wait, haven't we? Do we get that before we get the welcome to the party stuff?
I'm not positive like which order that comes
in.
I'm
trying to think of the actual order now of let's see, because
he doesn't talk to Elle until a little bit later first. So
I think that okay. Well, I'm trying to now I'm trying to remember why, because he gets in the air vent after he falls down the shaft, right?
Right. So whatever.
Does all this happen before he throws the body out of the window?
I believe so. Right. So whatever the exact sequence of events there.
Okay.
There's this.
Yes. Because here's what happens. He's on the roof and they find him on the roof.
Yeah, and then he has to run back down.
Right. So they realize that he has to be on the roof because they realize that's the only place you could be broadcasting out to the world.
Yeah.
Right. And so Carl and a couple of guys are machine gunning him on the roof. And that's why when Elle comes out of the store and looks up, he sees like the fire from the guns. Right. So he goes back in and then he breaks through this shaft. Now, this is what Richard Brody said he was over with the movie at this part. Because we get this scene where McClane takes his machine gun and he's trying to climb down to a different duct to get away from these guys. And he falls like 2 or 3 floors in the duct and then grabs onto it.
Yeah, with his fingertips basically grab onto this open air duct.
So whatever, this is unrealistic, but he gets in the vent, and this is a very, it's an iconic scene, very well done scene. And actually this line that he came up with, which is probably one of the top 4 lines in the film, right? Where he says, what does he say? Come to the coast. We'll have some laughs or whatever.
Yeah. Come out to the coast. We'll get together, have a few laughs.
Right. And he says it in this kind of snarling, sardonic manner. And he's now stuck in this vent. And he's like, he has this other line. Now I know what a frozen dinner feels like or whatever, which isn't particularly good. But
now during this kind of section of the film, also we have cross-cutting between Elle, the terrorists, and John. So there are like 3 different kind of action scenes kind of going on at the same time.
3 components of the story running simultaneously.
That are interweaved pretty deftly, I'd say. It works pretty well. And then we get very importantly, the first conversation between Hans and John McClane.
Well, you're jumping ahead, because at this point we have to, Willis gets out of this vent, right? Because Carl is called away. Now Carl's pissed because his brother died. His brother was the first one who died, who was sent down in the elevator. So let's keep this in mind. That
Tony is dead.
Tony is dead. Carl, this very elegantly blonde-haired, he has this very remarkable mane of hair. He is pissed off during this film. He wants to kill this guy. Hans wants to stick to the plan, and that's what's important to them. So to him, so they have some conflict. Now, after Willis gets out of this vent, he sees the cruiser coming up, and it's driving around in a circle. And he makes this crack about his fucking Stevie Wonder driving this car, which isn't particularly funny. But he wants Al to come in. He wants the police, and he's happy that they're there. So he's trying to figure out, how do I get this guy's attention? Because he comes in, Al does, and this is where we get this guy says he's watching this football game, and he's
USC Notre Dame.
Yeah, and he says, shoot, dang it, I had like whatever amount of money, $50 on this game or whatever. Right. And then Powell's basically like, fuck it, it's a wild goose chase here, right?
Yeah, and he's leaving the building then.
Right. So does all of this, I think this happens before we get this. In my, we're going to go with this because in my trajectory, we get this whole scene before the Gruber McClane conversation. So McClane somehow manages to throw a body out of the building onto this car below. Now, this is where physics just be damned, because if you actually throw a body out from a building, it's going to go 1 inch from the building and fall straight to the earth.
Right.
Somehow McClane manages to project this body 30 yards from the building. It lands on this car. Powell hits reverse, and then the terrorists start firing at him. And he's like, I need backup now. God damn it now. So he's yelling for backup, his car's getting turned into Swiss cheese by these machine guns. And then we get this famous cut where Willis delivers his "welcome to the party, pal" line, which again, it's a great line as delivered by Willis, who has great, like, a sort of comedic delivery. He does a good job with this line. So now we're going to get some of the cops. This is what sets up the cops are going to come. And it's going to connect Powell to Willis or to McClane.
Right. And
okay,
then,
all of that happens. Then we get this.
Then we have this dialogue because so Hans doesn't know who John McClane is, right? It's just somebody in the building, obviously. They don't know that he's a police officer yet.
Right.
And they have this dialogue. So Hans, over the walkie-talkies, says to him, my name.
I think before this, it's important because McClane calls him on the mic, on the walkie that he took from this other guy that he killed, right?
Yes. Yeah. From Tony. Yes.
So one of the terrorists is like, so he's talking to him, and the terrorist is like, how does he know all of this shit? And Gruber shuts him up. Again, showing that Gruber is smarter than other people. So Gruber's like, shut the fuck up. Don't let him know that he knows this, right? And then Gruber asks him, I'm at a loss. My name. What's your name?
Right. So he does that. Then, my name, but who are you? And then he gives this critique of, again, American pop culture. He says, just another American who saw too many movies as a child, another orphan of a bankrupt culture.
I love that fucking line.
Who thinks he's John Wayne, Rambo, Marshall Dillon. Just as a note, everybody knows who John Wayne and Rambo are. Marshall Dillon refers to Matt Dillon, who was the marshal of Dodge City, Kansas, in the popular show Gunsmoke. And then John responds, I was always partial to Roy Rogers. Actually, I liked those sequin shirts. Now, as a note, right? So instead of taking the hyper macho masculine figure,
right?
John's actually feels more of an affinity with this more effeminate cowboy figure. And then Hans responds, do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy? And that allows the delivery of the by far best line in the movie.
Yes.
Because the way that Bruce Willis delivers this is perfect.
Because we hear the elevator the bell go off. So now McClane knows that the terrorists are there. So he's getting ready to get the fuck out of there, right?
Yeah.
And that's when he gets to deliver the yippee-ki-yay motherfucker line, which is a great line. And it's really, you're right, it's made by the delivery, because Willis delivers it as though he doesn't know it's the awesomest line in action film history, right? And I think that's what's important about it, is it's a casual delivery. It's not a like, Schwarzenegger, this line is awesome, pin it up, motherfucker, right? Because actually there's this other line that he has that's Geronimo, motherfucker, that's not as funny, because that's more of like a traditional action thing. Now this yippee-ki-yay line, I don't know if you've done research on this. I've done a lot of research on this. I'm trying to figure out, where does yippee-ki-yay come from, right? Because he's saying, okay, I identify, I like Roy Rogers, and he's going to do this throughout, because he says, call me Roy when he's talking to L. But some people say Roy Rogers said yippee-ki-yay kids. That was something that he would say. Other people say this basically comes from a Gene Autry, who was another singing cowboy who had this song where he would say yippee-ki-yay or something. I actually listened to this song. It's a terrible song. So I couldn't figure out, does Roy Rogers ever actually say yippee-ki-yay? Certainly D'Souza thought he did. And that's why they took it. And McClane or Willis talks about how he was like, is it yippee-ki-yay or yippee-ki-yay? He was getting into, how do you pronounce this? And actually he said he thought they were going to cut the line. He didn't think it would make it to the final cut. Right. And it turns out to be like, obviously McClane's sort of famed line that he says in all of the movies, never captures the magic of how he says it here, because again, it's a response to this, you don't think you can beat us. And then he's taking this, we'll just credit it to Roy Rogers. He's taking this line from Roy Rogers that's silly as hell, yippee-ki-yay, adding motherfucker to it, which is cool, postmodern pastiche, motherfucker added to this. And also it's a response to, you don't think you can beat us. It's a way of saying, the way I read it is, it's like he's saying, we're going to figure it out, motherfucker. Like, let's see what happens.
Yes. Yeah, it's just, everything about it is brilliant. There's a reason that it's the most famous line from the film, and it's hard to imagine thinking that they would cut it.
Yeah, now, I mean, when you watch it, now you're just like, fuck, man, this is, I think there's a Vox article that argues it is the greatest single line from an action film history, and I agree, it is. And it's the delivery, really. I mean, it's a clever line, but it's the delivery, because I've tried that, I've practiced saying this, and it's never cool. It's stupid.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's the delivery that really makes this line.
So then John is introduced to...
maybe it's worth focusing on this scene, because this is like one of the most important scenes, right? In that we get this, Gruber fucking hates American culture again, and he's making this clear, and this allows McTiernan and the script writers to mock action films, because Rambo is one of the characters who's brought up, and actually Stallone was offered this role, so that's funny. And actually there's another line about orbiting Arnold Schwarzenegger, so they even reference Arnold. So there's clear meta commentary here. Gruber hates American culture, and interestingly, it's also the case that McClane's not a fan of these macho action heroes, as you said, and he picks this kind of silly one with sequin shirts, right? These shiny shirts. So the whole thing is, it really works well, and it's I think it's a clearly fully self-aware meta commentary on the action / Western genres.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I concur. Then after that, John and Al meet for the first time over the walkie-talkies. So they begin their bonding process, which will run from here throughout the end of the film.
Right.
And Al asks him, what do I call you? And then John thinks for a moment and says, call me Roy.
Is this where Al says light him if you've got him, and he's like way ahead of you?
Yeah. Yes. Yes,
So
it is.
casual smoking was still cool in the 80s.
Yes.
So McClane's a smoker who stole some smokes off of the terrorists.
And then we're also introduced to the character that so irritated
Yes.
the sensibility of Roger Ebert.
Yes.
Namely, Deputy Chief Dwayne Robinson.
Who's played here by Paul Gleason, and quite well, I think.
Yes,
I like
Gleason does a great job with him.
I think one thing that Ebert missed too, or that I think people missed, is actually one of the things. This I only got this last time that I watched Die Hard, which is Dwayne Robinson has a story arc. He actually moves from this stupid macho cop, actually starts to move more toward L's side. Right, and I'll tell you where the dialogue is where he does, but like we see at first he's just like, what the fuck are you doing, Al?
Yeah. So Al and him are talking about, well, who are you talking to? Right. We know that Al was talking to John McClane. Right. And Al says, I think he's actually a cop, maybe not LAPD, but he's definitely a badge. And then Dwayne says, how do you know that? And then Al, a hunch, things he said, like being able to spot a phony ID. And then Dwayne delivers this line really brilliantly. Jesus Christ, Powell, he could be a fucking bartender for all we know.
Right. And then on top of that, when Al says something about the body that fell on his car.
So Dwayne just incredibly dismissive. So he's the authority figure. He wants Al to know that you're just like a low-level bitch. I own you. Right. And then so Dwayne continues, we don't know shit, Powell. If there's hostages, how come there's no ransom demands? If there's terrorists in there, where's their list of demands? All we know is that somebody shot your car up. It's probably the same silly son of a bitch you've been talking to on that radio. And then L points out the obvious. Well, excuse me, but what about the body that fell out of the window? And then incredibly, Dwayne deadpans, probably some stockbroker got depressed.
Right. So
why are stockbrokers in the Nakatomi building? It's not.
And what are the odds that a stockbroker would hurl himself out of the window?
Right. So the idea that McTiernan and the writers are not aware of the stupidity of Dwayne Robinson, I find that unbelievable. They're clearly aware that he's this fucking buffoonish figure. He's like this stereotypical authoritarian officer with a stentorian voice who's going to take command of the situation, right?
Yes.
And I think that's where Ebert's wrong, is that they're aware of the fact that this is not a realistic portrayal of a police officer.
They're wrong. Yeah. So Ebert and some of the other reviewers who called the movie stupid, they just missed the satire here. And I think that's why the satire here is good satire, unlike Last Action Hero, because it's enough like a typical action film that you might confuse it for one. But it's not. It's a smarter action film that's taking this stereotypical dumbass police chief or whatever, and it's making fun of him. It's making him slightly stupider than he usually is. And in fact, we'll see this because what we get is up the hierarchy, they continue to get even more stupid.
And they become more stereotypical.
More stereotypical authoritarian. So Dwayne's stupid, and his idea is we're going the fuck in.
Yeah, we're sending the SWAT in. Our advantage is we have a lot of guns, and we're going to use the full force of our power against them. Right. They won't even know what hit them.
Right. And so, yeah, so we think, and importantly for the argument that this is a cerebral film, that Robinson's clearly an object of satire here. And McTiernan's making fun of authority and authoritarianism and machismo. Robinson's like, look, we're gonna go the fuck in. That's what the LA police do.
Right. And that's when John says specifically, you macho assholes, no.
Right. Well,
Like, don't do
he's
that.
saying to L, like, why are you going in? Like,
Right.
I'm telling you what you're dealing with. These are very sophisticated people.
Right.
Yeah, he calls them macho
And when
assholes.
right, and then when they're sending the SWAT in, Dwayne Robinson literally says, kick ass.
Yeah, yes, as if the satire isn't clear enough. He's just like, yeah, kick ass motherfuckers. Right. So and this is very interesting, this whole scene, right? Because we get the SWAT are gonna come in.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, like, Gruber has planned for this.
Yeah.
Like, he knows this is going to happen. He's just like, whatever, I'm completely in command of the situation. They have this scene where and I hadn't seen this until now, a very interesting shot where a SWAT officer hits a rose and says, ow, like very conspicuous, like he got pricked by a thorn.
Right, they're running through a rose bush and he just goes, ow. And they leave it in the film.
Right. And it's like clearly this kind of mockery of this macho guy who gets hit by a thorn and is like whining about it.
Right. So the SWAT teams going in, they start taking fire. Importantly, Gruber tells his team, just injure them, don't kill them.
Right.
But as they're shooting at the out the windows, right? Dwayne Robinson is clueless about what's happening. And then the kind of leader of the SWAT team says it's panic fire, they can't see anything. And then Al says, they're shooting at the lights.
Right. Like, you fucking idiots.
Like, I know what's going on here. And then Dwayne just takes the line and says it himself.
After a few lights actually go out, then he's like, they're shooting out the lights. Right.
Now, this is, I mean, the dialogue here is kind of clunky. The idea that Al, this like patrol officer, knows these strategies, but that the deputy chief doesn't.
Yeah, see, again, it's part of the satire, because the point is Al's like this, you know, he was on the streets. He's not this kick-ass macho guy. So he knows shit the same way McClane does. The people who are idiots are the SWAT guys.
Right.
And Dwayne,
I like that.
I think it's a funny scene.
Yeah, I agree. And also going this route, you made the note about the higher up the hierarchy, the dumber and more macho these people become. So what it seems to be telling you is that anyone who wants to get status within the kind of official police hierarchy, the way you do that is not be competent, it's be a macho asshole, right? So the more status you have, you gain that status from this bravado and stupidity, and that's why we see this trajectory
which
here.
Is the exact opposite of Dirty Harry,
exactly.
Where you being effete and adhering to all of the lawyerly, scholarly rules is what allows you to climb the ladder.
Right. So being an effective a paper pusher and suck up and is what helps you in Dirty Harry.
Right. So we get this. The SWAT guy, the SWAT leader, who's even stupider than Robinson, is awesome. And he's just like, send in the car.
Right.
So the SWAT people are getting shot and injured. And so his response is, we just need more force. Motherfucker.
Yeah. And we'll see that that's also a theme with the official law enforcement, is to all they do is up the ante on the force. They go from SWAT officers to an RV to, as we'll see, fully armed helicopters.
Correct.
Right? So their playbook is just force. That's it. Just escalate force.
And cutting the lights, which we'll see. But so they send in this RV, and then we have this line from Theo, who's the black mastermind, like computer mastermind, who I like. You've said you don't because he's annoying. He is annoying.
Yeah, he's obnoxious.
The point of the character is that he's this obnoxious character, because he even says to Hans, like, you didn't invite me for my charming personality. So he's like, what is this? And the cops have themselves an RV, and he's like quarterback, and he's guiding them. He says the quarterback is toast.
Right.
But he's guiding the terrorists through this. So he's telling them that there's this RV coming. So they get this rocket launcher prepared. They shoot the RV with the rocket. And then McClane, you can see this is where he like, another thing about McClane, although obviously this is inconsistent because he needs to make jokes and stuff, is that he actually gets hurt and affected by the loss of human life.
Yeah.
So he's really upset by the rocket launching of this RV, and Hans says, hit it again. And then McClane gets on and is like, no, motherfucker, like you already made your point, upset about this. And Gruber's like, fuck you, I'll take that under advice, hit it again. So they rocket this thing again. Right. So this whole LAPD, we're going to storm this motherfucking building, and they just get absolutely obliterated.
Right. And then I think we do have this scene that I think is a little bit discordant with what we're setting up here about the escalation of force from the LAPD and the fact that the way that you actually do effective policing is being cerebral and intelligent. Because
Isn't
John,
that redundant?
Yeah,
you use your brain and your mind.
Yeah, for emphasis. Two different words to mean the same thing, just helpful for the viewer.
Yes.
So John makes a C4 bomb himself.
Yeah, so it's like John's now pissed.
Right, and throws it down the elevator shaft, which just seems like a terrible idea.
Yeah,
right.
And then says Geronimo motherfucker, which is this very like Arnold type behavior.
Right, and who knows what that's going to do when it explodes, right? Or who would be threatened by that?
Yeah, it's a really weird. You're right. It comes from the book, and I wonder if it had cool, like it was a cool explosion or whatever.
Right.
Because it is discordant, and also it's weird that they try to justify it because Elle says, "I'll wager you took 2 more out with that."
Right. Yeah. It's just, it's an odd, like, what about potential innocent people just getting obliterated?
Yeah, agreed. It's a weird scene, probably not a good one.
Right. So, but it does set up humorous dialogue, again, showing the stupidity of Dwayne Robinson. So
yes.
John is talking to Elle, and Dwayne takes the walkie-talkie from him and then chides McClane for blowing up part of the building, specifically for the fact that there was glass that went everywhere.
Yes.
And then John says, glass? Who gives a shit about glass? Who the fuck is this? And then Dwayne says, this is Deputy Chief of Police Dwayne T. Robinson, and I am in charge of this situation. So then we have just this line, a few lines of dialogue where John just undresses him, right?
Yes.
Says, oh, you're in charge. I got some bad news from you, Dwayne. From up here, it doesn't look like you're in charge of shit. And then he has a further line where he said, because Dwayne calls him an asshole, and he says, asshole? I'm not the one who just got butt fucked on national TV, Dwayne.
Right, and they cut to Argyle, who's listening to this in the basement, and he just starts cracking up. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So this is
Dwayne is completely emasculated.
Right now, this is the kind of anti-authoritarian and anti-authority you want from McClane that's consistent with the theme, which is he's basically like, you tried to be, I hate authority because you try to be so macho that you fuck shit up.
Right.
Unlike there are rules and I don't follow them. That's a little bit inconsistent. This dialogue is consistent with this theme from McClane.
Yes.
In between here, by the way, there's a little bit, and maybe we'll talk about it later, but there's a little bit going on with Holly Gennaro and Hans Gruber in between this stuff. We have a few scenes, and then we were introduced to this terrible side plot that I think should just be cut from the movie. It's like
I've cut it from my brain already. Yes.
I mean, it really is the one very egregious flaw in the film, which is this side plot with this fucking guy named Richard Thornburn, who's this news anchor who's trying to get this story. We're not even going to talk much about it. It should just be cut from the film. The only thing it does is play on this who's Holly Gennaro so Hans can figure it out, but it's totally unnecessary and idiotic.
Right. And Thornburg is a terrible character.
Yeah, just
in
awful
addition
character.
to that.
So why they thought, you know what, we're going to bring Thornburn back for the second one because he was so cool in the first one.
Although, I guess to be fair, Thornburn is like the over-the-top, media figure in the same way that Dwayne Robinson is the over-the-top police authority figure.
They try to kind of like shoehorn this ambitious competitive world of masculine competition in the news world, right? So you see it in the police world. Now we're going to show it in the media world. And Thornburg's like this sociopathic, narcissistic, incredibly ambitious person who's unscrupulous, of course, trying to
do anything to get the story. It's all about ratings, kind of taken from the network or something.
It's 5 to 10 minutes that are totally unnecessary in a movie that could be trimmed those 10 minutes. So we'll just basically leave that aside. So
but what is important is Harry makes his move.
One of the greatest scenes in action film history. Harry, after taking a few bumps of coke, is like, fuck it, I'm gonna make my move here.
He's gonna negotiate with the Euro trash because he does $1 million deals for breakfast.
He tells Holly he's going to talk to these guys, and he's like, I think I can handle some Euro trash.
Yes. So he goes into the office to talk to Hans, and there's some dialogue here that's just, over the top, but Harry says, hey, business is business, man. You use a gun, I use a fountain pen. What's the difference? Let's put it in my terms. You're here on a hostile takeover. You grab us for some green, but you didn't expect some poison pill was going to be running around the building. Am I right?
And Hans is this is great because Hans is fucking mocking the shit out of him. Yes. He's just like, how did you figure all of this out so quickly?
Right. So Harry clearly has no idea what's going on.
Yes.
Feigns that he does, spits out this atrocious dialogue, and then he says,
No, this is great dialogue. It's fucking hilarious.
No, I mean, atrocious, like it's hilarious, but it's atrocious if you were actually trying to negotiate with somebody.
It's a completely ridiculous negotiating tactic.
Right. So he long and short of it, he tells Hans that he's friends with.
He has this line where he's like, Hans, booby, I'm your white knight. And this booby line, he apparently ad-libbed.
It was a significant addition to the film. I mean,
it's hilarious. It's one of the most quotable lines. It's hilarious. And apparently it's a Yiddish term basically for like friend, which is interesting because I never knew what booby meant.
No,
but you can kind of see that it means like friend, like you're trying to be whatever. And again, apparently
it's like a less formal, it's like he's trying to ingratiate himself.
Right,
with
exactly.
Hans.
So this is funny. And at this point, Harry's like sweating profusely. So we get he's all coked up.
Yes. And he says that he can get McClane for them. Right. So they call up McClane on the walkie, and Harry then starts trying to get McClane to turn himself in.
Right. Now, this is where I think Harry's character is interesting because he doesn't actually say who McClane is, even though he knows.
Yes.
Right. Because we have this thing, and I don't think it works particularly well, but running through this, there's this Hans doesn't know Holly is McClane's wife.
Right.
And Harry does. And when he's negotiating here, trying to get McClane to come down, we get, he's saying he's acting as though he's McClane's friend, and John's clearly worried about this.
Yes.
And he says, I told him that you were my guest here and that we've been friends or whatever. So he doesn't say what he knows about the Holly and John's relationship. He pretends that he and John were long friends.
That's right.
Now McClane also, and this illustrates that John is smarter than, he's a very smart cop, because he knows what Hans is about at this point, and he knows Harry is fucking up, and that this isn't going to end well for Harry.
Yes. So, I mean, basically, John tries, at this point, Harry's already dead because John's not turning himself in, and that's the only way Harry gets out alive. So they have, John and Harry have some chat, and John's like, dude, tell them you don't know me. I don't know what the fuck you're doing.
Right.
And then Harry realizes he screwed shit up. And his face, he's got this nervous grin, and he's just profusely sweating, and his hair is disheveled.
And I love that he apparently, part of his negotiation is he asked for some Coca-Cola. And so they drop this glass and pour him a little bit of Coca-Cola. Yes,
the quintessential soft drink of America, right?
Yeah.
So then Hans obviously shoots him, and that's that, right? And then Hans now has some demands that he's going to make. Now, we as the viewer don't know why he's making these demands, if they're serious or not, right?
Well, they sound pretty silly.
They sound silly, but we don't know exactly why is he doing this. But he communicates with them. I won't go through all of the list of demands, but note that while he's going through this dialogue, John is listening, and McClane's like, what the fuck?
Right.
And then he makes a comment about in Sri Lanka, I want the 9 members of the Asian Dawn released. And then Carl, who's next to him, is like, Asian Dawn, and Hans makes the quip, I read about it, I read about them in Time magazine.
Right. So just more pastiche of American culture, in that he reads these magazines, and he's just like, he picks up tidbits here and there and uses them in this sort of like comical gesture that he's a terrorist.
Right. But what is important about these demands is he says that he will take the hostages to the roof of the Nakatomi building.
Right.
And so the hostages can get picked up by helicopters, and then they'll be flown to the Los Angeles International Airport, where they will be given further instructions.
Right. Okay. And then this is where we get the FBI comes, right? So Dwayne hears that Dwayne Robinson hears that the FBI is there, and he's like, oh, the FBI is here. And then Al's like, do you need a breath mint? Because we get the sense that Dwayne is going to be groveling to them because he looks up to them so much. And they come in, and it's this black guy and this white guy. And he says, I'm Agent Johnson. That's Special Agent Johnson. No relation.
Right.
So we get the satire is getting more in your face now. So we have the FBI, and they're perfect assholes, and it's Johnson and Johnson. So there's just like very stereotypical like male name, and they're complete macho idiots, right?
Yeah, phallic name, not just stereotypical male name.
Phallic names, and they're complete buffoons. So we'll get to them because we're interrupted with this great scene, but they're here, and they're going to be
taking charge, because
what
Agent Johnson tells Dwayne Robinson, we're in charge now, step down, motherfucker.
Not only that, he's basically like, we'll try to let you know if we take all of your people or whatever. So they have nothing but contempt for the police, and this is clearly a send up of so many action films where the police are doing something and then the FBI come in and they're just like, you're not in charge anymore, motherfuckers. We're taking this over.
Just mocking the turf wars between police departments and the FBI, etc.
Right.
So,
And now we get this, I think this is where we get the scene where Hans wants to check on because he's been looking. McClane took the detonators for the C4, and so Hans is really upset about that, and like he realizes that they need to get the detonators.
So importantly, they need the detonators because what they're actually going to do is blow the roof off of the Nakatomi building.
Right. So it's a double cross, as we'll figure out. So
yes.
he goes up to look for the detonators, and apparently what had happened, how this scene got put into the film was, I think it was the writer D'Souza heard Rickman. They wanted a scene with Hans and McClane before the end. And they couldn't figure out how to do it. And D'Souza happened to hear like Rickman doing an American accent, English American accent, and not in English, an American accent, and thought, that's interesting. Like we could kind of put that in. And so we get Gruber, who's looking for the C4. He sets his gun down, and then I think he jumps down, and we see an Uzi or some kind of machine gun pointed at his face, and it's John McClane. And here we see how smart Gruber is, because he doesn't freak out. What he does, in fact, is you kind of see his face that he recognizes the ruse he's going to play, or he realizes it, and he starts playing as if he's this American, and he's just in the building. He's like, oh my God, don't kill me. And McClane's like, relax, not going to kill you. And then Hans wants to get back to his handgun. So he's like, let me check on this. It's just over there. McClane is firm with him and says, no, they fucking like sealed off that area, or it's dangerous or whatever. And then he's like, if you want to stay alive, stay with me. So he can't go to get his handgun.
We have to note so John says, I said, forget the roof. They've got people all over it. You want to stay alive, you stay with me.
Yeah.
So he delivers like a stereotypical 80s action film one-liner.
Right.
But immediately after that, they do a reaction shot of Hans' face, and he has this kind of flummoxed / disgusted look, like he's aware of the stupidity of the one-liner, right? I watched it three different times just to watch. Like it really is brilliant acting, because they really make a point of Rickman's character, Hans is just like, come on with this one-liner bullshit.
I thought the reaction was that he was disappointed because he couldn't get his gun.
Yeah, I think I thought it was more to the way that the line was delivered.
I like that. I like that. But yeah, either way, he can't get his gun.
Yeah,
so we have this mano a mano, and this is so well done. And also this is the only time in the film, I think, throughout this scene that McTiernan uses a famous Dutch angle. So the Dutch angle is where you tilt the camera a bit, and it's unsettling to a viewer because we're used to having the shot straight on
vertical. So a Dutch angle it's an angle that's not where the camera's not at 90 degrees. It's an oblique angle that you set the camera.
Yes, and it's in a kind of unsettling feeling that it gives the viewer, especially in this scene where you have lines across the walls that are very geometrical. So it really emphasizes that we have this tilt. And the thing that's upsetting or anxiety provoking about this scene is that we're trying to figure out if McClane knows that something's wrong here or not. Is he completely buying this? And this is great because Rickman's doing this accent that's pretty good, but kind of funny because it's not quite right. It sounds almost like a stone surfer accent of some kind.
Well, I also want to give Rickman praise for playing, being Hans, acting like a party goer, right? And
so he's doing two characters now.
right,
He's acting as Hans, acting as a party goer.
right, and it's really well done because he acts pretty realistically, but not quite, right? Because a normal person wouldn't be able to act like a trained actor would.
Right, exactly. So
that's this difficult thing to portray.
Yes, I agreed. I mean, you have to act. You're a professional actor, and your job now is to act as though you're not a professional actor and to fuck up your acting a little bit, which he does. And so they have this scene, so they're talking back and forth, and McClane asks him, you know, like he pulls out cigarettes and he's like, "Do you smoke?" And then you see Gruber is like, he kind of gets this like weird chuckle and he's like, yeah, almost like guilt, like we're badasses breaking the rules. So he hands him the smoke, and then he says, you know, he tells him who he is. He's this New York cop. I'm John McClane. And he's basically like, what's your name? And this is weird because we don't know in the final cut, we don't know how McClane knows that it's not the person he says he is. But we get this shot of the, like, where are who's in what office room? And it shows us like W. Clay. Mm-hmm. And Gruber takes a moment and then he says, Clay, Bill Clay. So it's weird because you want to think the way it's shot and edited, it's almost as if that's what's giving it away, but it's not.
Yeah, agreed.
Right. So we don't know. And apparently, again, in the before they cut it, there was a scene in which McClane saw his watch, and that's what allowed him to infer that it was one of the quote unquote terrorists, but we don't see that.
Right.
But this still is expertly done. So we're still like, okay, does he actually know? And they make it even better because then McClane says, have you ever shot a gun? Gruber, as Bill Clay, says, I went to the range once. And then McClane hands him the gun. So now we're like, holy shit, is McClane killing himself because he's not smart enough? So he's giving him the gun, and then pretty much immediately upon getting it, we hear Gruber speak in German, and then he points the gun at McClane and says, where are my detonators? I'm going to count to 3. And McClane says, like you did with Takagi, and he immediately tries to shoot him, and it just clicks 3 times. And then we're like, oh yeah, like McClane's a badass. So McClane's like, he snatches the gun and he's like, no bullets. What do you think I am, fucking stupid, Hans?
Right.
Right. So McClane's outsmarted him, and he says something like, pretty clever with that accent. You ought to be on TV with that thing.
Yep.
And but then, again, we get a stupid, now you know for sure it's Hans. He just tried to fucking blow your head off. And instead of killing him, you just stand there.
Right. And then the elevator opens and Hans retorts, you were saying about me being stupid, right?
Right.
And then John, obviously, then he's led on another chase with these terrorists trying to machine gun him down.
Yes, but this is, I mean, it's just, even during after the bell goes off and Gruber says, you were saying, just shoot him in the head. Right. You know who the fuck he is at this point, but he doesn't. So then you go on, this is another great action scene, probably the best. Well, I mean, there are stunts throughout, right? But this is a great action scene because this is where the not having shoes pays off, right? Because he's running from these people and they eventually get into this room, and Hans and the other, they're shooting at him. It's a shootout. And then Hans says in German, basically, shoot out the glass, which I like because the guy doesn't actually understand him, which is, it's not clear because Hans is like, what the fuck, dude? Shoot at the glass.
Right.
Carl didn't understand. It's not clear if he didn't understand because he doesn't actually speak German. I don't remember if he does that. It's unclear why he doesn't understand him, but he's like, shoot at the fucking glass, idiot.
Right.
So they shoot all of this glass on the ground, and then we get this great shot where we see McClane, it looks at the exit, looks at the ground, so it goes to that. Then you would look at his bare feet. So we know, fuck, he's got to run across this broken glass with his bare feet.
Yep.
So he does, of course.
Yes, he does. And then he has to pick the glass out of his feet.
Yes.
As he's bleeding copiously.
Yeah, pretty soon here, he'll have to pick the glass out of his feet.
I won't get into the dialogue in detail, but there is more bonding between after this between McClane and Al Powell, where
Yes.
Powell lets him know that the reason that he's just does, you know, desk work is that he shot a kid.
Yes.
Who was 13 years old. He's like, it was dark and I couldn't see him. He had a fake gun that looked real to him. So
it looked real enough, he said.
Yeah, it looked real enough. So
this will pay off.
Yes.
And the very stupid end that we just pretend never happened.
Yeah, so he said, I just couldn't bring myself to draw my gun on anybody again.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So it's you know, some reasonably effective male bonding. The so-called payoff at the end isn't really much of a payoff, but the conversations between Al and McClane are well done and well acted throughout.
Yes. And now we go back. So we've got the agents Johnson and Johnson who are just like, we're going to fucking kick ass, man. Like, we're playing the book. Basically, we're going to cut the lights. They're going to fumble around and fucking be so worried. And then they're not going to know what the fuck hit them when we bring in the copter.
Right.
And so there's this great fucking scene where Agent Johnson, the white Agent Johnson, makes a call and he's like, this is Agent Johnson. No, the other one. So they just, again, playing on the fact that there are these two Johnsons, and they're basically like, they whatever, there are these machinations, but they're the first thing they're going to do is they're going to shut the power down. Now, it turns out that this is important because the whole plan that Gruber had devised for getting through this last lock, that they make a lot of comments through the film about, I hope you can break this last one, you know, and he's like, trust me, whatever. Theo finally realizes how it's going to happen, because when the power gets caught, this magnetic seal automatically like opens.
Right.
Now, this is stupid because imagine you're a terrorist who's putting your life on you're a thief and you're putting your life on the line. And the guy who's planning it, who's in charge, says, you're just going to have to trust me that we'll get the last lock. Don't worry about that one.
Right. But that'll be revealed later.
Right.
So the FBI, eventually they do get them to cut the power.
Right.
The seventh lock is opened. We get the Ode to Joy in all of its glory as Hans and Theo, they all have these like orgiastic looks on their faces as it opens up.
So this is more evidence that McTiernan knows what he's doing, because this shot is clearly ironic. Because we have now the full glory of Ode to Joy is playing.
Yeah.
And the shots are set such that there are radiant lights right behind them. So we see Theo and Gruber absolutely jubilant as this thing opens up to reveal the bearer bonds.
Right. And so then and McClane is obviously like, wait a second, what the fuck's going on with the power? So he's talking to Al and he's like, wait, what's going on here? And then Al laments, ask the FBI. They got the Universal Terrorist Playbook and they're running it step by step. So again, this low-level police officer who just does desk work is more brilliant than the FBI, and he's memorized the playbook and realizes that the people inside obviously just want them to do that, right?
Right. It's bizarre because, for one thing, you wouldn't talk over the walkie-talkies that the criminals have
Right.
and tell them what the FBI is doing. Obviously stupid. Also, how the fuck does he know what they want? He has no
Right.
idea.
He has
So
no
apparently
idea.
he somehow intuits that they have prepared for the FBI to run the terrorist playbook step by step.
But
Which
this,
it turns out they have,
but we do get this great dialogue between Johnson and Hans. So Johnson contacts Hans and says, the State Department has arranged for the return of your comrades. Helicopters are en route as you requested. Hans says, I hear you will be ready. And then Johnson says, by the time he figures out what hit him, he'll be in a body bag. And then Hans says,
right.
when they touch down, we'll blow the roof. They'll spend a month sifting through the rubble. By the time they figure out what went wrong, we'll be sitting on a beach earning 20%.
Right. So this is the humor is in the cut, right? Because we cut right from Johnson to Hans, who's
right. So
2 steps ahead of the FBI.
Right. So Johnson thinks that they're outsmarting Hans, and we realize that Hans is outsmarting Johnson, which doesn't require much effort.
No, it doesn't. And then it's about this point that Hans realizes that Holly Gennaro is Holly McClane. Who gives a fuck? That stupid plot.
No, because first, importantly, McClane figures out that they're going to blow the roof, but they send Carl up to take them out.
Oh, that's right. So McClane and Carl, here's another one of those scenes, because Carl puts his machine gun to McClane's face, and then he's basically like, so before he was like, I want to fucking fill this guy with bullets, but now he's like, for me, this is personal. So apparently he wants to beat his ass now.
That's how they justify the fisticuffs, the physical conflict, is by having Carl say that it's so personal for him that he needs John to feel all of this pain.
Right. Now, I will say, so that's stupid. I mean, that's not very plausible, obviously. I will say the fight scenes in this film are pretty grisly and gritty, right? And in fact, during this one with Carl, McClane saying like, I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker, I'm gonna like cook you and eat you, and like it's kind of a violent fight. Now of course McClane takes about 10 jump kicks to the face, and he's still going.
He absorbs them quite well.
But whatever, eventually he hangs Carl from a chain that kills him, presumably. I mean, in any believable universe, Carl is dead.
So then McClane makes it to the roof. Right. And
but before this, now because Hans has figured out who Holly is, that's why he took her. So in between this, now we have Hans figures out Holly is Holly McClane, and I mean, whatever. This is not a particularly interesting part of the plot, but McClane goes to the roof to warn them that it's because he's figured out that they're going to blow the roof, and he's looking for Holly, right?
And so he tells all of the hostages, he's like, get down, like leave the roof, right?
And before this, we have Johnson and Johnson in their fucking copter.
This is my favorite kind of now this is all crosscut, so there are a variety of things going on at the same time, but this dialogue here. So they're flying these fully armed helicopters, and Johnson says, I figure we take out the terrorists, lose 20 to 25% of the hostages tops. And then the other Johnson says, I can live with that, right? So there's it's so amusing to me. Just we're going to lose a quarter of the hostages. Oh, well, fuck it. I can live with that. Like, so light them up, man.
Playing up this macho FBI shit. We're just going to blow shit up. Some of the people are going to die, whatever. And in fact, Johnson then says that shortly thereafter, just like Saigon, huh?
So he says, yeehaw, just like fucking Saigon, slick. And then the black Johnson says, I was in junior high, dickhead. So just way over the top machismo that's just incredibly toxic and stupid, but
right.
I find it amusing.
Very humorous how it's satirized here. But then we get this scene on the roof. So at this point, McClane's shooting his machine gun to scare the hostages to leave the roof.
Right.
The copter mistakes McClane for a terrorist, and they start trying to shoot him.
Right.
And he's like, Jesus Christ, I'm on your side, or whatever. They show that they have no capacity to shoot anybody because they can't hit him.
They can't hit McClane.
Right,
They go
they can't
past
hit McClane.
They decide to make a second pass to take him out.
Right. And at this point, McClane's like trying to escape. So he ties a fucking fire hose around his waist that he's going to use as some kind of a rope harness when he jumps from this building.
Yep.
And then we have Han saying, blow the fucking building, and another caught. And like the guy says, somebody's on the roof though. Or blow the roof. Guy says, this guy's still on the roof. And he's like,
still on the roof.
Yeah. And he's like, who gives a shit? Blow the roof.
Yep.
And then I do like that we at least get McClane talking to himself saying like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, if I survive this, I'll never go into a big building again. So again, he's not like happy about having to do this.
That's right. So the roof is, as he's jumping with this fire hose tied around his waist, the roof is blown.
Right.
And again, it's mostly an excuse for a cool action scene.
Yeah, there's this huge explosion.
It takes out the FBI helicopter.
And we get this, I love this line by Dwayne Robinson.
Oh, that's a brilliant line.
Yeah, so Dwayne Robinson says, we're going to need more FBI guys, I guess.
Right, so the helicopter just gets wiped out. Johnson and Johnson are dead. And Dwayne's response is just, yeah, we need more FBI dudes to come here.
And this is what I'm saying. We've kind of had this Dwayne has changed a little bit because he went from, he's going to be this badass, we're going in. And he starts saying like, I have a bad feeling about this, Powell, he says to L, and he makes these kind of quips about how dumb the FBI is.
Right.
So he's maybe changed a little bit here.
Yes.
And yeah, this scene of McClane jumping is like, it's whatever, but it's actually, there's pretty good tension created when he swings and breaks into the building. Mm-hmm. And he's still connected to this metal thing that's pulling him down. So he's trying to untie the hose from his waist, which he does manage to untie right before he falls out of the building. I thought that scene was pretty well done.
Yeah, I think it's pretty effective. And then there's intercut between that. So then intercut between that, there's this dialogue between Holly and Hans that I like. I think it's effective dialogue.
Did you notice before we get into this, I tried to figure out what happened here. So we have Bonnie Bedelia again, who I think her name's Bonnie Bedelia, who plays this character, and like for whatever reason in this scene, they've cut another button from her shirt.
Right.
And I'm like, whose decision? What did they do there to show some bitch there? I don't know, but it's very conspicuous. It really stands out. I don't know if she was like, hey, I've got a rockin' bod, like I'm gonna show, or if if McTiernan was like, hey, we need to show some of that.
Right. I mean, they don't do much with her cleavage though. It's just like this one scene
it's just one scene where they do for whatever reason. It's kind of off. It's a little off-putting, I would say.
It doesn't fit with the rest of her character at all.
Right.
So she's talking to Hans and she says, after all your posturing, all your little speeches, you're nothing but a common thief. And Hans actually gets irritated, and he approaches her quite quickly with some anger and says, I'm an exceptional thief, Miss McClane, and since we're moving up to kidnapping, you should be more polite, right?
Yes.
So usually he's an unflappable figure, but if you accuse him of mediocrity, he doesn't
Yes.
take kindly to that because he's a
Yes.
superior creature to others.
Yeah, so that actually pisses him off. Like he wants people to recognize his brilliance in the thieving department. Now, I should say there's like a couple of scenes here that are pretty stupid that we've kind of glossed over. Like Theo's death is stupid, but here's one that's also stupid that feels more like the movies it's trying to satirize, but it's not satire. At one point there's this scene where Carl's really pissed off. Carl being the blonde-haired terrorist, and Holly says, it's John, he's still alive. Like only John could drive somebody that crazy, which is just such a dumb line.
Yes, yeah, it is. That was bad
Nobody
writing.
would say it, and if you did say it, it should be satirical, but it's clearly not. It's just, yeah, it doesn't work very well. And then this is right around the point too that Argyle, he sees Theo in this ambulance, which is the terror or the thieves' escape vehicle.
Just to be clear, Argyle has been in the parking lot for the entire film,
waiting for McClane,
and
then locked in. So he is just this young limo driver, used to be a cab driver. He knows what's going on though, because he's heard the CB or whatever, and he's heard McClane talking. He decides to ram Theo, who's driving this ambulance. Argyle hits the gas, crashes into him, then gets out and punches out Theo.
Knocks him unconscious with one hook.
And this is weird because it's totally unnecessary. It doesn't add anything to the movie.
No, it doesn't. That's why I just forgot about it.
Yeah, which is probably the best thing. Also, by the way, the continuity error here, because when we see the terrorist or the thief's truck at the beginning of the film, there's definitely no ambulance in it.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, a few. I mean, you could. Die Hard, it's a really good film, but you could cut 20 minutes off of it.
Yes, I think you could cut at least, I'll say at least easily cut 10 minutes off of it.
So then we get to the final showdown between
the
Hans,
necessary mano a mano.
Yes, between,
although it's not exactly mano a mano.
No, it's not. There are two men against McClane, but so McClane gets back to the 30th floor, and he realizes that his machine gun is completely out of ammo, and he only has 2 bullets left for his Beretta.
Yes.
Right. And that's when we get the axial cut where it zooms in on duct tape. And we realize that John has figured something out. We don't know what it is, but we realize that it's duct tape is important for his final plan.
Right. We saw this earlier. It didn't use the same cut, but it showed us the same sort of thought process in McClane, that when he saw the lights and the Christmas paraphernalia and decided to make the now I've got a machine gun ho thing with Tony. So he sees this. We learned in the film, the language of the film, he's figured something out. He's going to do something.
Right. So he enters this room where Hans has Holly, and there is another one of the Gruber group, the guy who was the security, playing the security guard on the first floor.
And this is a great shot because McClane's kind of silhouetted, and behind him sparks are like shooting out. It just looks nice.
Yeah, it does. It's a really nice looking shot. And then there's this important dialogue between John and Hans. And so John asks him, so it was all about a fucking robbery. And then John, so we as the viewer, we want to know, well, why were they blowing up the entire building? What was the point of that? So they have,
at least,
so they have John say, why do you have to nuke the whole building, Hans? And then he explains, well, when you steal 600, you can disappear. When you steal 600 million, they will find you unless they already think you're dead, right? So now we know the entire point of that ruse was the authorities would think that this group was dead and it would be over
Right.
with.
So this is an excellent subterfuge, right? The idea,
Yes.
and in fact, they'll use something quite similar in Die Hard 3 with Hans' brother coming up with a similar idea of faking your death to avoid the authorities.
Yes. So then, John says, well, you got me. So he
Yes.
drops his machine gun, which had no bullets. And now, again,
And we see
here at
Holly
this,
is like upset too that he
yeah,
dropped
she's
it. She's
upset.
kind of like, what are you doing?
And then the other, not Gruber, but the guy who had been playing the security guard is about to shoot John, which is exactly what you would do. You dispatch him immediately and be like, we're done. And Hans says, nah, we have to have the final showdown.
Right. Hans is like, this is mine, which
Right.
makes no sense with the Hans character, because the Hans character is the guy who sticks to the fucking plan and doesn't allow personal feelings or personal animus to interfere with the right move.
Except for here, he can't help but get a few last digs about the inferiority of American culture.
That is right.
So Hans says, still the cowboy, Mr. McClane, Americans, all alike. This time, John Wayne does not walk off into the sunset with Grace Kelly. Now, this is keeping with the theme of the kind of error-prone nature of Hans when referencing pop culture.
Yeah.
But this time, McClane catches the error and says, that was Gary Cooper, asshole. Right. So he's referring to the movie High Noon.
Yeah. Hans makes an erroneous reference for at least a second time in the film. Right.
Yes. And then Hans says, enough jokes. John says, you'd make a pretty good cowboy yourself, Hans. And then Hans, he has what he wants to be the final one-liner. And he says, oh, yes. What was it you said to me before? And then in his inimitable fashion, Rickman delivers the Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. And he says
He says motherfucker. He says yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Right. It's so hilarious. So John
absolutely butchers it.
Right. And John just starts laughing hysterically.
Yes.
And then all of them, besides, with the exception of Holly. So Hans starts laughing because Hans was actually going to shoot him, but he starts laughing and he holds off for a moment.
Yes, and the other guy starts laughing.
Right. So everybody's laughing, and then Hans grabs his gun.
Well, before that we've got a shot where we see that the McClane's Beretta is duct taped to his back.
The camera zooms back so you can see that behind his back there's this Beretta duct tape.
Right. So we know that now we know he's got a plan.
Right. We also know that he's not just laughing because he's kind of gone crazy from his ordeal. It's
so
actually
Holly
deliberate.
Seems to give a look like you're fucking crazy.
Right.
It's not clear what Gruber and the other guy are really even laughing, like what it is that they think's going on.
No, it's not clear.
But it's like one of those scenes where somebody starts laughing and then other people are like, what the fuck? We'll start laughing too, right?
Right. And then as Hans is about to pull the trigger, McClane takes out Hans and does a little like cross move with his arm and shoots the other guy.
Yes.
Right.
He shoots the other guy in the head, but apparently he did not hit Hans in the head.
No. And then he makes what he thinks is his final one-liner. So McClane says, happy trails, Hans, right? Like they just are stuck in the stereotype of an action movie, and every time something cool happens, you have to make a one-liner.
Yes, it's not cool unless you cap it off with a great one-liner.
But he made his one-liner a bit too soon, right?
Right.
Because
so now we have, and these are like, it's fine here, but this is something that's really annoying about action films where these people somehow grab onto like a pinky finger and are hanging from a building.
so Hans, as he was falling out of the window, he grabbed Holly's wrist.
Right.
And so
And specifically her Rolex.
Yes. So as John struggles because, Hans is actually now moving to point his gun back at John.
Yes.
Right. So John's trying to get Hans
to unclasp the watch.
So then we see the Rolex is unclasped, and Hans falls to his death, and the Rolex falls. And the cheap and easy read here, the kind of feminist reading would be, this is a patriarchal movie, and what this represents is that as Holly throws away her career, and her career success as represented by the Rolex watch that was introduced earlier, and she takes McClane's name again and basically reasserts traditional gender roles.
Well, because the
movie can finish.
So I don't think that that's necessarily a cheap and easy reading. I think it's a pretty coherent one, actually.
Yeah, and that's true. Actually,
now, your attitude toward it depends on your views. Are you more conservative or whatever? But a feminist fairly could criticize this and say, yeah, like clearly what's well, I don't want to say clearly, but it's a fair reading that the watch did symbolize Holly's career. Yes. As did the use of Gennaro instead of McClane.
Right.
And that
those were the
watch. Yeah.
Because those were the two egregious symbols of her independence.
Right. And she loses the watch, and she says, when they meet Powell outside, she says, I'm Holly McClane.
Right.
So she takes his name, loses the watch, which is a signal of her, a symbol of her job. And yeah, like, I mean, I would just see this and say, like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a way to structure a society, whatever. But a feminist fairly could say, yeah, the sort of moral here is that you have to take your husband's name, and that's like the good thing to do, and lose your job.
Right. But one reason that it's somewhat problematic is because we have this, I don't know how long before this, but sometime before this, there's this dialogue between kind of poignant emotional dialogue between John and Elle, where John really makes a point of saying, I should have been more supportive of Holly's career, and I fucked up, and that's my bad. And then we have even further back the bathroom dialogue, where John chides himself for being immature about her name change.
Right. So the second one is important, and this was this scene where McClane pretty much this is like if you did like the hero's journey or just the normal like sort of action film story arc. This is like the hero at his lowest point.
Right.
And he thinks he's probably going to die, and he's talking to Elle. And I actually think this is quite good acting by Willis. I've seen contemporary reviews. They were mediocre or tepid on Willis. I think he does a really good job here. And I know they shot this in a variety of different ways. And one of the ways they shot it, he was not choked up. They used the choked up version. You can tell that Willis is proud of this, because when they asked him his favorite scene from the movie, he picked this one and said he liked that they used like the choked up version here. So he was like quite upset. You can tell he's kind of holding back the desire to cry about this. And he says, you tell Holly that John's sorry.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. It's not straightforward, right? It's not a straightforward what we need to happen for the world to come back to some kind of order is the woman quits her job, gives up the watch, and takes her husband's name.
Right. In fact, the equally coherent reading is the male has to recognize that women have independent careers and they need to be supportive. And probably John should have moved his ass out to LA and become an officer there.
Yeah, that's equally plausible reading, right?
And in fact, that's maybe even more plausible, but the fact that what happens when John does go to LA, he solves this incredible case that the LAPD completely fucked up and the FBI fucked up.
Right.
So once he goes out there, he shows that, yeah, he's a brilliant police officer and he would be great in LA.
Right. And in fact, although, Holly doesn't end up saving the day, obviously that's McClane's job, they go out of their way to make her this strong woman in a way that I actually find annoying, because there's this other scene that we didn't talk about in which Holly comes into the office to talk to Hans, and he says, "What idiot put you in charge?" to her, and she says, "You did."
Yeah.
When you murdered my boss, which is, nobody would act this arrogantly and flippantly to a terrorist who's shown no compunction about killing people whatsoever, right? It's just like this kind of false feeling attempt to make it clear that Holly's a badass and she's not going to be cowed or bullied by this guy.
Right.
So yeah, I agree with you that the although there is textual evidence for the feminist reading, and maybe what's happening here is we just don't have a completely coherent narrative, right? There are multiple kind of angles and they all made it into the film, and you can pick and choose. A feminist could pick those things and say, this is my reading and my criticism of it, and I think that's a reasonable reading. You can rightfully object to it and point to these other things that seem actually to chastise McClane for not accepting his wife's career.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So yeah. It's not clear exactly what we're supposed to take away from that. Right. And then we have the last 10 minutes, which should have been
just caught.
Yeah, I mean, this, the characters meet each other outside of the Nakatomi building, and then Carl comes back from the dead.
Yes.
He has a machine gun, and John and Holly jump to the ground.
Yes.
And it leaves Al. And then the question is, will he be able to fire his gun at Carl? And he does. He unloads it.
Right.
And that's it.
The answer is emphatically yes, he will.
It's such an emotionally impotent scene, right? There's no.
Well, here's a weird thing. So on Rewatchable, I think this is from Rewatchables where they talked about this scene, and I think Simmons or somebody else is criticizing it, and then one of them noted that, like, in the theater, people were just fucking clapping when this happened. People just loved it. And I don't get it, because I'm with you. It's just completely, not only is it an emotionally impotent scene, it's actually like positively annoying because it's so implausible.
Yes, it's completely implausible, but there's just, if you're going to throw in something that implausible, at least have some payoff for it, right?
Yes, right.
And there just isn't any. Like, I don't care that Al reasserted his masculinity, as Richard Brody puts it.
Yeah, and it also like cuts against some of these themes in the film, right? Because the point is, Al's been off the street, and for some reason, like, the fact that he's not this ultra masculine guy is exactly what makes him a good cop throughout the film. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, he's a real cop again when he can put lead into this motherfucker, right?
right. Like, yeah, it does. I agree. It kind of works against some of the messaging of the film.
Yeah, because this is where you get the redemption through violence that Brody lamented, right?
Yes. Yeah. Agreed. So, and then Argyle meets Holly and John, whatever. They get in the limo and start making out, and it plays some music. The end.
Right.
Really, again, I think it should have
just ended in the building.
Yeah, with Hans falling to his death, and then maybe Holly and John can hug or something.
Yeah, and this is maybe like with Argyle too, is where you almost have too many characters, and it's like, I don't really need a lot from Argyle. Like, he's kind of cool at the start, and maybe you can have him in this thing, but I don't need any more from him. I don't need him to be a hero.
Yeah, he served his purpose by having some witty banter with
Right.
McClane.
Right.
That's all we need from him.
Yes.
All right, so let's finish with two questions. First, is it a Christmas movie? And second, what is our overall assessment of it? So let's just dispatch with the is it a Christmas film quickly. So there was a YouGov survey conducted in 2020 that found that 51% of people who voted said it was not a Christmas movie compared to 39% who said it was. Bruce Willis is on record saying that it is not a Christmas film, although the writer, Stephen D'Souza, is on record saying that it is, and the director, John McTiernan, is on record saying that it is. So
Yes.
we're gonna
Yes, he
have
is.
I'm gonna have to side with the director and the writer and fall prey to the intentionalistic fallacy.
Yeah, Roland Barthes would say the author is dead,
Right.
but I don't even care who said what. It's clearly a Christmas movie. It takes place on Christmas. It has Ode to Joy running throughout it, which is very Christmas-like music.
Yes.
There's dialogue that talks about Christmas, and it's not really forced. Like, Lethal Weapon, there's a little bit of Christmas here and there, but I don't really feel as though it really is an integral part of the film. Here it kind of is. I mean, it's fucking as Christmassy as Home Alone is, really. I mean, Home Alone's just like, throw some fucking lights on the house and we'll call it Christmas.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's unequivocally a Christmas film. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I will second that. It is a Christmas film. It's not only is it a Christmas film, it is the best Christmas film. It is better than Miracle on 34th Street. Or, I mean, maybe it's tied with It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, I would say it's tied. I'd say
Okay.
your Christmas regiment of films is you start with Miracle because that's the worst of the three. Then you go to It's a Wonderful Life and you nightcap it. When you start adding the alcohol and the eggnog, you do Die Hard.
No, I say when you really need to go to the spiked eggnog is when you go to Die Hard 2, which is also a Christmas movie.
That's true. That's true.
Takes place on Christmas the next year, but you need a lot of alcohol to enjoy that one.
Yeah, that one's not easy to sit through.
No.
What about overall kind of assessment here?
Yeah, so I kind of wavered on this because I was a little disgruntled with the Thornburg character as I was halfway through this film, the second viewing, and that was irritating me, and I was like, I'd give it an 8.5. Now I'm back up to 9.5 because at finishing it, you can kind of ignore some of those stupid elements. It's not a flawless film, so I very rarely give out 10s. I gave Halloween a 9.5, which is because it does have flaws. And I think this does. There are a few 10s like Maltese Falcon or Dr. Strangelove maybe would be a 10. The Shining would be a 10. I'm not going to give out a 10 very often. This doesn't quite make it to a 10 because of the extraneous material that should have been cut. But goddamn, is it well directed? I love McTiernan's style of direction. I love how he doesn't do a lot of cutting during this. It's much more fluid action where he follows something, a lot of tracking shots. I love the Dutch angle with Hans and McClane because it's tasteful, because McTiernan's not in your face, look at how auteurish I am. He uses techniques to propel the story. They're in the service of the story. The satire is hilarious. I like the Robinson character more this time on viewing it and noticing how he's starting to dislike the FBI and see what Powell's talking about. So all of that works really well. Rickman just fucking rips up this performance. It's one of the better performances around. Willis is maybe an 8 out of 10 as McClane, but he's quite good, and he's so synonymous with McClane now that you can't imagine somebody else playing it. So I think it all works really, really well. The only objection I have to it is once in a while there are some like elements that seem to not work with the theme, and then there's this stupid side plot that they should have just caught.
Yeah, so I'll say 8.5. I like it for all of the reasons that you listed. I view it, it's like, it's such a nice meta film. The characters are all really interesting and rich. Hans is an incredibly rich character, just played perfectly by Rickman. And you can view it, there's the buddy cop angle, there's the commenting on American pop culture angle, there's the, it's kind of this anti-Dirty Harry angle, right? Like in an interesting way, although as we mentioned a few times that they kind of cut against that. But I think that theme is definitely there. And I think that it really is interesting, isn't it, that people following Die Hard didn't take any of that from it. They didn't realize, like, one thing that people really love about it is that it's kind of this anti-stereotypical action film.
Yeah, they also didn't take the sort of satirical or the commentary aspect from it. So you get like Under Siege. I mean, I guess you could say Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey, who played the bad guys in Under Siege, are sort of hamming it up.
Right.
But the problem is Seagal is just not meta because he's too sincere. And then but like there's Passenger 57, which is absolutely atrocious, and Speed, which is a very good action film, but it does not have that intellectual heft of Die Hard, right?
It's very, very rare to see a major, like a blockbuster film that is intelligently able to draw upon all of these different genres and make have intelligent things to say about them.
But here's my question. It's because this is what I thought about. If you're going to give it an 8.5,
yes,
what action movie is better?
I think, well, yeah, that's true. Maybe I'd go at 9 because I do think it's the best action film ever made, probably.
Yeah, or at least it's the best, like, modern sort of quasi-traditional, as we would come to recognize it, action film. That's why I went up to 9.5 because
I think like I would give North by Northwest 9.5, and I don't want to put Die Hard.
I think I'd give North by Northwest 10 and just say, like, that's about as good as it gets. Die Hard is flawed. If they had cut, I honestly think if they had cut that 10, probably 10 minutes from it, it would be a 10 for me.
Yeah.
The Thornburg shit, stupid, and the end, stupid.
Yes, the end is not good, unnecessary. And the Thornburg line is, not only is it unnecessary, it actively detracts from the film.
Yes, it does. It detracts from the film. And God, that guy played that schmuck in Die Hard 1 and 2 and in Ghostbusters. He played the environmental guy.
Yeah, Jesus. So, and I would say after discussing this and thinking about it pretty carefully with all of the different characters and their dialogue, I think it's clearly the case that McTiernan is in on it. Like, he understands what he's doing.
Right.
You couldn't create these characters in this way if you didn't understand what you were doing and what their role in the film was.
Yeah.
I just don't think you could.
I think that's right. I think.
So then you have the question of what happened to McTiernan, such that you go from these brilliant meta kind of spoof films they're more than spoof because they're great films in their own right. They're not like Predator is a great science fiction film. Die Hard is a great action film. Why do you go to The Last Action Hero?
Yeah, it's like
what happens?
How do you go from great genre films that subtly satirize the genre to a film that absolutely lampoons it, but has no actual inherent quality of the genre. Like you in a good, I think usually in a good satire, it can play as a good film, and you might mistake it for just the genre piece and miss the satire. That's when you've, I think, got a good satire.
Right. Where you could watch it without the meta lens, or without knowing that any of it was tongue-in-cheek, and it's still very enjoyable.
Right. I think most people honestly watch Die Hard and just think it's a good action film. They don't think about all of the levels of satire and the cultural conflict and I mean, because there's this interesting comparison and contrast running through it between McClane and Gruber, right? McClane's this like ordinary American everyman who's pretty smart. He's smart, but he's an ordinary American. And Gruber's like he's this European cosmopolitan, thinks he's too sophisticated for it, right? And that's an interesting thing running throughout it. There's a lot.
I still like the pastiche postmodern reading of Gruber. I think works.
Yeah, that's a fair. I think
he just basically recycles pop culture while acting as if he's transcended it, right?
Yeah, well, maybe what you would say though then is that he's the reason that he creates like postmodern pastiche is because he actually doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right. Because that's what I would say.
Although then pilfering a quote about Alexander and saying that it's from his classical education when it's not actually from Plutarch, that's kind of funny. I'm not sure how that exactly plays.
Well, he doesn't know where he got that from.
Correct.
Right? Like the point is, he's just like, I get this from Forbes. I got this from Time.
Right.
I thought I got this from Plutarch, but actually it's from Twilight Zone.
Yeah. And then, I mean, he's clearly like superficial, right? And that's an interesting thing because he likes the John Phillips and he talks to him about John Phillips.
Right.
So,
and also interestingly, like, so he's just, it's all American culture is just degenerate American capitalism, but his sole motivation is apparently greed. That's it.
Right. And it's interesting because it's just greed straight up for greed, right? He's not even trying, like you could see this guy as this sophisticated person who hates American consumer culture, and he's stealing the money to just prove that he's more clever.
Right.
But he's not. There's no the indication is just he wants the money because he likes money.
I will say the idea that Hans Gruber would be happy on a beach earning 20% is not at all realistic with his character.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. Yes. Yeah. But yes, I mean, right. So, I mean, McTiernan's story in some respects reminds me of Oliver Stone's story, which is you think like Oliver Stone makes a couple of legit masterpieces, I think Platoon and JFK, and some very good films, Wall Street, Salvador, and then starts making films that are unwatchably stupid, like Any Given Sunday, U-Turn
is atrocious.
Not United 93, but the one about the World Trade Center.
Natural Born Killers.
Natural Born Killers is at least like interesting. I don't like it, but I could see people arguing it's good. But like Wall Street 2 is just quite literally a mediocre film that's not that well made, like there are just obvious flaws in it.
W is just a mediocre biopic. Yes.
Right, just a very tepid.
Like you can't even do like genre film well anymore.
Right. So what the fuck happened to Stone? I don't know. What happened to McTiernan? I don't know. I don't know how you go from making from the string of Predator, Die Hard, and Hunt for Red October to Last Action Hero, whatever the fuck that one was, and Rollerball. It's hard to explain. It's inexplicable, I would even say.
It is, and I think listening to a few McTiernan interviews, he's kind of a blunt thinker. He's not very nuanced or subtle, at least as he articulates himself in interviews. And perhaps what that suggests is perhaps his kind of Procrustean like vision of like this is anti-authority needs to be filtered through really talented writing, right? Like
Right.
maybe you need this kind of combination because he actually thinks more like Last Action Hero. But if you
I
have
refuse to believe that.
well, okay, fine, but how the fuck do you do that then? Right. So
I agree.
I think there might be a part of him that's more on that end of it. And if you have some people who discipline that,
yes,
he'll be a little bit more subtle and allow it to be more playful.
I've said this before, and I think although I grant that Paul Verhoeven's a better director, I do think it's a useful comparison because Paul Verhoeven made RoboCop, which is this hilarious satire that's it's not subtle, but it's funny and tastefully done. And then he's done some other satires, like even Starship Troopers is just getting borderline like hokey in the satire, right? It's so obvious and in your fucking face. And he does other, like Basic Instinct. It's just like it's a weird sensibility, but somehow it all worked for RoboCop. And then it just kind of went, Showgirls too. It just kind of went astray. And I think the same thing with McTiernan. It's like he had this sensibility and it really worked for Predator and Die Hard. And then it just went, I think he got his yayas out for Last Action Hero, which he just saw, I'm going to go all the way with skewering the action genre. And that's where his sensibility was lost.
Oh, yeah. So I guess, although we both agreed on that, a lot of this in Die Hard is deliberate. It's unclear exactly like how much credit McTiernan gets for that deliberateness versus the writers, right? I mean, there's probably
versus the synthesis of the writer's input, the actor's input, and the director's input, right? Which is, it's what a film, and unless you have a really totalitarian auteur, it's going to inevitably, it's going to be a collaboration between many different elements that have to work together somehow to create a unique work of art. And in Die Hard, it just all came together. I mean, you just got all of the right pieces and they fell into place.
Yeah, agreed. So, and also now that you mentioned Paul Verhoeven, we're going to conclude this by saying next week we will do Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop then as another example, perhaps. Well, not perhaps, another example
clever
of
sci-fi satire or Jesus
retelling of the New Testament. We'll dig in next week.
Yeah.